Grakmorrow the Fungal Patriarch, swarmbinder of the Spore-Crypt tribes. From the Killer and Keeper universe, it is whispered in the gill-choked catacombs that Grakmorrow once consumed the last Dreamcap Oracle, a seer grown entirely of prophetic spores. And with her final vision still fermenting in his gut, he uttered the Sporeshade Vow. When the last breath of sky wilts, and the worm gods forget their names, the Capstone Crown shall bloom again from a throne of skulls and silence. Some claim the vow summoned the rot choir into sentience. Others say it was merely a symptom of the Mycelium's madness. The Mycelic warlord, grandfather of spores, mouth of the rot choir, lord under the Capstone Crown, Fungork spore-bound orc variant. Though no kin dares claim his blood prehistoric, his flesh refuses rot, but not madness. His veins pulse not with blood, but with iridescent mold. The shroom deep of Verox beneath the bone-cap glades. The bone-cap glades stretch for leagues upon leagues, once the site of the Moss Shrine dynasts, a fungal empire ruled by symbiotic priest kings who stitched fate into flesh, using spore-threaded prophecy. In the age of sallow fires, a conflict erupted between the glade dwellers and the oath-bound bleach knights of Drom, whose sun-forged blades could sever rot at its root. The war, known in silent shroom script as the Sundering of Spores, left the glades scarred and cursed. Now only fungal phantoms linger, and the few ruins that remain hum with ancestral resentment, particularly the cradle of Mournshale, a half-buried amphitheater where the first rot choir uprising was drowned in spore fire. There, a petrified throne still stands, etched with the names of fallen dynasts and haunted by a spectral dirge said to carry the last commands of the Spore Kings. Pilgrims who linger too long near its lichen-crusted steps often wake from dreams, weeping soil and memory, their glyphs pulsing faintly when moonlight graces the rot-stained bark. Yet whispers tell of the crypt-marked, a present-day sect of relic hunters and fungal apostates who navigate the cursed remains, seeking fragments of the Capstone Crown and shards of dreambone etched with prophetic decay. Their leader, a scar-hooded exile called Norex of the Blight Tongue, claims he dreams the thoughts of the glades and that a second sundering is near. Norex walks a fragile edge between madness and revelation, burdened by a prophecy he half believes may end him. Some say he seeks redemption for a right once denied. Others claim he is merely a vessel for the glade's will, his autonomy dissolved by the spores. His loyal few whisper that each of his dreams ends with the same vision, a spire of bone rising from ash, crowned in rot, singing a name he cannot forget, his own. A present-day sect of relic hunters and fungal apostates who navigate the cursed remains, seeking fragments of the Capstone Crown and shards of dreambone etched with prophetic decay. Their leader, a scar-hooded exile called Norex of the Blight Tongue, claims he dreams the thoughts of the glades and that a second sundering is near. Once the site of the Moss Shrine dynasts, a fungal empire ruled by symbiotic priest kings who stitched fate into flesh using spore-threaded prophecy. In the age of sallow fires, a conflict erupted between the glade dwellers and the oath-bound bleach knights of Drom, whose sun-forged blades could sever rot at its root. The war, known in silent shroom script as the Sundering of Spores, left the glades scarred and cursed. Now only fungal phantoms linger, and the few ruins that remain hum with ancestral resentment, their glyphs pulsing faintly when moonlight graces the rot-stained bark. An alien sprawl of decay and hallucinogenic wonder where the cycle of death and rebirth is painted in hues of violet, bone, and bruise. towering mushrooms rise like cathedral spires kissed by stormlight, their swollen caps etched in sigils that writhe and reconfigure themselves under moonlight. Their stems throb gently, feeding upon the leviathan carcasses of titans long forgotten, their gory remains laced with void rot and whispers from beyond the veil. The air here is thick as honey and gold with floating spores, each a drifting memory fragment of the dead. Prolonged exposure warps the flesh and frays the mind. Eyes bloom with tiny fungal lashes. Teeth sprout moss that hums when near lightning. Hallucinations become shared dreams, such as the infamous Night of Crimson Bloom, when a band of pilgrims inhaled the spores near the petrified maw and collectively envisioned a titanic fungal colossus weeping blood sap beneath a lightning-torn sky. One awoke chanting the forgotten sigils of the Spore-Crypt matrons. Another clawed a map into stone, revealing a path to a lost catacomb hidden within the root warp hollow. Some say that vision marked the beginning of the Rot Choir's prophetic convergence, a turning point written not in ink, but in shared delirium, communal and invasive, until one's thoughts are no longer entirely their own. Madness here is not a scream, but a choir, a slow, harmonious descent into ancestral reverie and fevered insight, where even one's shadow might whisper secrets that were never yours to know, each a drifting memory fragment of the dead. Inhaling it summons ancestral voices that murmur secrets in forgotten dialects. The fog does not merely obscure, it reveals, painting visions across the inside of the mind. Fungus-hewn spires, gnarled like blackened bone, rise as grotesque palaces, where the spore sanctifiers conduct the ritual of blooming silence. A grim rite performed at dusk, mirrored in dark opposition by the cult of the unflesh, a heretical splinter sect that believes in communion through decay rather than silence. While the sanctifiers chant over corpse plinths, the unflesh consume their dead in ritual feasts, hoping to ingest echoes of ancient prophecy. This schism has sparked silent wars beneath the glades, where mycelic assassins and prophetic cannibals trade death for dogma in the dark, a grim rite performed at dusk. Hooded figures, their flesh interwoven with lichen, kneel in concentric rings around a corpse plinth carved from ambered marrow. There they chant in breathless harmony as mycelial tendrils rise from the ground and pierce the offering, extracting dreams from the dead to nourish the hive mind. Pilgrims who survive the rite are often seen wandering for days, their eyes glowing with the soft light of shared delusions, each crowned with balconies that weep milky pollen like the wounds of dying gods. Hollow beetle shells, their chitin carved into sacred geometry, serve as altars for bloodless rites. The earth beneath has been hollowed, no longer soil, but a lattice of living rot, a vast mycelial intellect that pulses in waves of sentient decay, its thoughts grinding and cyclical, like a choir of deep earth rot priests. The shroom deep hums, not with sound, but through pulses in the mycelial lattice, a language of resonance and decay. Thoughts are translated through shifts in spore temperature, scent alterations, and tremors in the fungal web. Grakmorrow speaks not with words, but with fungal bloom. It was through this arcane method that he turned the tide of the siege of Hollowroot, when rival factions of mycelic dissidents sought to sever their psychic link to the Rot Choir. Grakmorrow released a pulse of bitter spores into the wind, saturated with betrayal memories harvested from the minds of executed traitors. Those spores settled into the lungs of the rebelling war priests, overwhelming their thoughts with shared guilt and the remembered agony of their apostasy. Within moments, the would-be schismatics collapsed, sobbing in the muck, begging for forgiveness from a voice that never spoke aloud. Thus, the fungal bloom became not just a language, but an executioner's song. Commands laced into chemical trails, ancestral grief relayed by scent, and memory projected through the vibration of spore clouds. It remembers. And beneath the glades, the grandfather of spores dreams in lichen-woven silence, his breath stirring the hive thought with every exhale. Grakmorrow towers at nearly 8 feet, his silhouette a grotesque fusion of orcish brutality and fungal overgrowth. Yet beneath the monstrous form lingers a shadow of forgotten regality. There is something tragically noble in the way he carries his corruption, as if he were once a prince of an age drowned in spores and sorrow, now crowned in ruin and walking memory. His form is draped in living decay, with tendrils of sentient mycelium winding across armor stitched from chitin plates and necrotic leather. The armor was won during the siege of the Blooming Gulch, a week-long nightmare in which the moon never rose, and spores blotted the stars. Grakmorrow led the assault through fields of twitching moss and root-tangled trenches slick with the pus of ruptured pod beasts. The defenders, bloated fungal sentries and zealots wrapped in lichen shrouds, fought with serrated mandibles and spore flame that boiled bone from flesh. Screams echoed like chants, rising with the rhythm of war drums beaten on hollowed skulls. He tore the chitin plates from the backs of dying corpse moths, their exoskeletons still vibrating with the remnants of death hymns. These creatures, once guardians of the fungal monarch's tomb, burst into clouds of caustic dust upon death, blinding and choking his warriors. Grakmorrow fought without pause, his own skin blistering under spore burn, until he reached the wrought sanctum and split the monarch's cradle open with a blade carved from petrified mycelium. Each plate now engraved with hymns of defeat and rebirth, soaked in martyr's ash and consecrated with the ichor of 21 mycosere martyrs. In the siege's aftermath, the gulch itself wept rot for a cycle, blackened tears oozing from the stone, drawing pilgrims who licked the walls for visions. The surviving tribes renamed the battlefield the Mouth of Memory, where moss grew in the shape of lamenting faces and spores, carried the echoes of war prayers. From that moment, Grakmorrow was no longer merely warrior or myth. He became the Mourning Crown, the fungus-crowned revenant whose presence marked the sanctification of devastation. Children were born with rot sigils across their backs, and the rot choir composed a new verse in his name, sung only in places where the ground still smokes with memory. The necrotic leather was flensed from the back of the mold tyrant of Shadewarren, a despot slain by Grakmorrow's own hand in ritual combat beneath a rain of spore fire. His cloak of twilight moss was sewn by the blind funguseers of Drelveth Rootspire, dyed in blood sap and stitched with threads of sinew pulled from the heretic prophetess Melora, whose soul he shattered with a gaze. Even the bones laced into his boots, pale, ridged, and creaking, are sacred remains of those who dared deny the rot's dominion. Each item whispers of conquest, martyrdom, and myth, worn not just as armor, but as testament to the Bloom Father's ascension through sacrifice and annihilation. The chitin armor is more than defense. It is a mnemonic ward, each plate etched with names of fallen tribes that once defied fungal destiny. In one dire encounter against the pyrekin of the Flame Cradle, the etched names began to glow, blinding his enemies and forcing their firecasters to scream the names aloud, unknowingly invoking a plague curse that rotted their throats mid-chant. The necrotic leather binds him to the judgment of the rot. It is said to scream during moments of cowardice or betrayal. During the treachery at Sporewind Hollow, the leather shrieked before a single blade was drawn, allowing Grakmorrow to turn on the hidden betrayers before their ambush fell. His cloak of twilight moss is worn not merely for status, but to absorb visions during moonlit rituals, each thread a conduit for ancestral counsel. Once it pulsed and wept blue spores moments before a heretic's approach, warning Grakmorrow of poisoned words wrapped in false allegiance. The bone-laced boots echo the dying screams of their previous owners with every step, a haunting chorus of refusal turned into propulsion. When cornered atop the Shattermire Ridge, the chorus surged to a scream, granting him such frenzy that he ran through molten mud and shattered 3 shield walls before his rage dimmed. Together, these relics are a covenant worn in flesh, a living pact with the cycle of rot that governs his every breath, each piece not only memory, but a sentient sentinel. His skin, where it remains visible beneath the lichen and cap leather, is a bruised gray-green marbled with calcified spores and pustular blooms that weep phosphorescent ichor in rhythmic pulses. Veins of bioluminescence pulse slowly through his limbs, echoing the hypnotic cadence of rot made divine. His back is hunched beneath a crown of shelf fungi that fan outward like ossified wings, each rim dusted with ancient pollen that glitters faintly under moonlight. Towering stalks of brittle coral fungus arc over his shoulders, trailing threads of luminescent filaments like spores caught mid-dream. Puffball clusters rupture in time with his breath, releasing shimmering clouds of memory ash, a sacred and feared effluence believed to carry the echoing last thoughts of the dead. The faint names whispered to those who inhale are neither hallucination nor mere trick of mind, but ancestral murmurs burned into the spore by ancient rites. These names may be real, may be prophecy, or may be the spectral regrets of lives once offered to the Bloomfather. For the Spore-Crypt tribes, a tangle of kin clans scattered across mist-swaddled bogs, subterranean crypt warrens, and bioluminescent fungal glades. To hear a name is to be chosen, either as a vessel of forgotten glory or as a bearer of unfinished vengeance. Chosen individuals are set apart, marked with the seal of remembrance, a spore brand that blooms across the chest in patterns unique to the name they carry. They are revered and feared, their lives transformed into walking sermons of fate. Elders consult them for insight, but never command them. And in battle, they are both shielded and watched, for survival is uncertain. Some burn out in madness, consumed by the weight of memory. Others rise to myth, guided by unseen roots and the whispers of the dead toward acts that reshape the fungal world. His face is partially encased in bark-like crust, a visage both feared and revered by the Spore-Crypt tribes, a confederation of semi-nomadic fungal cults, their bodies tattooed with ink mixed from fermented mold and ancestral bone dust. The tribes clad themselves in layered robes of tanned mushroom hide and moss-woven sashes, each adorned with prayer fungi that chant softly when dew-laden. At dawn, the Spore-Crypt kin perform the rite of the blooming silence, a ritual in which elders spread sacred mycelium across their foreheads while reciting the names of Wither, a litany of ancestors whose bones were buried in root circles. Youths are anointed with fermented spore paste and walk barefoot through fields of glowing lichen, absorbing ancestral dreams through skin and breath. At twilight, they return to the spore hearth, where Chantmoss sings low harmonics as they share visions around a fire fueled by fungal husks and scented mold. These rites not only bind them to the fungal pantheon, but align their spirits with the rot cycles that dictate life, death, and rebirth in their solemn creed. Their eyes are often sealed with bark blindfolds, believing true vision is granted only through spore dreams. The tribes follow Grakmorrow not out of fear, but awe. He is the walking myth, the Bloom Father, the herald of decay. To gaze upon him is to witness the living embodiment of ancestral rot. Among his followers, his grotesque appearance fulfills the prophecies etched in bone and remembered in Spore, that the true patriarch would wear decay as his crown. His mask of crusted bark is said to resemble the first fungal king's death grin, and many pilgrims kneel not in horror, but reverence, believing his deformity is a sign of divine favor. Children among the tribes are told that to dream of his face is to be chosen for the rot choir's sacred rite of becoming. One eye socket is sealed with amber fungus, a symbol of decay and occluded prophecy. The other glows with a deep golden hue, as if lit from within by bioluminescent hatred, embodying the paradox of insight and madness. His teeth are jagged, some grown into root-like curves, and his lower jaw is threaded with moss that drips constantly. From his spine hang chains of shriveled hands, not merely trophies, but sacred relics from failed aspirants and apostate prophets. Each desiccated hand bears etched runes in dried spore blood, detailing the bearer's final vision or betrayal. To the rot choir, these chains form the Codex of Folly, a living scripture of what must not be forgotten, and a grim ledger used in council. When decisions are made or judgments passed, elders of the rot choir consult the Codex, interpreting patterns in the runes for echoes of past errors and forewarnings of similar fates. The more grave the choice, the longer the gaze lingers on the chain. Within their circle, memory is law, and the weight of history is a spine they dare not break. Initiates are made to touch the links during their oath of mold, each link searing an ancestral warning into their thoughts, a rite believed to tether their soul to the rot cycle and bind them to the fungal will, ensuring loyalty through dread remembrance. His voice, when heard, grinds like mulch beneath iron, thick with ancestral decay, a sound that cleaves silence like a rusted scythe through bone-thick lichen. When he speaks, even the chant moss hushes. During one such dusk, he merely rasped, "The rot remembers," and 5 dissenters among the elder mycoseers fell to their knees, weeping visions of their own unborn deaths. His words are not persuasion, but prophecy twisted through dread. His breath smells of rot and revelation. Grakmorrow's monstrous lineage begins with his father, Durak the Verdant Maw, a great and terrible beast of an orc whose name is still uttered in reverent dread across the decayed frontiers. Towering even above his kin, Durak was a war chieftain turned fungal messiah, whose body burst with viridian tumors and bark-hard hide after drinking from the black mycelium spring deep within the rot-engorged rift. His roars could shatter stone and rupture marrow, and his wrath was said to call spores down like rain. Under his rule, tribes fell silent and trees knelt, their roots curling in supplication. Durak carried a living war club, a gnarled trunk embedded with screaming polyps, and wore a cloak of flayed bark skin still twitching with biotic nerves. He was not merely feared, he was worshipped. But it is said madness took him when the bloom eclipse came. He vanished into the rot-choked deeplands, pursued by visions none dared name. Some claim he became a god. Others whisper he lies dormant, buried in a tomb of amber root, dreaming of spores yet to bloom. To Grakmorrow, he is a curse of flesh and legacy, the verdant maw whose shadow he must either escape or fulfill. What made Durak, and his progeny so singular was not merely their immense strength or fungal corruption, but a profound metaphysical resonance with the rot itself. Durak's bloodline is said to pulse with spores that dream, consciousnesses bound not by thought, but by cycles of decay and rebirth. This ancestral strain grants visions in fever, communion in rot, and power from pain. Every child he sired bore signs of these gifts: the ability to hear the bones of trees whisper histories, to bleed memories into soil, or to command the loyalty of rot beasts through unspoken grief. It is whispered that their birth was heralded by mushroom rings blooming in the shape of ancient glyphs, and midwives who tended to their arrival were either enlightened or driven mad. Their greatness lies in the way they bend entropy into authority, shaping despair into doctrine and death into a language of command. Yet among rival tribes, this resonance is met with unease and fractured reverence. Some sects fear it as a divine infection, the creeping will of the rot manifesting in blood. Others envy it, crafting pale mimicries of their rites in desperate attempts to awaken dormant spores within their own young. A few heretical cults believe Durak's bloodline to be a blight upon the natural fungal order, aberrations that must be sealed beneath spore chains and saltstone. To the Spore-Crypt, they are living scripture. To their enemies, they are a prophecy best undone. Only a few of Grakmorrow's bloodkin endure, spectral remnants of a shattered lineage. His eldest sister, Vuriel the Hollow-Seamed, wanders the edge realms beyond the mycelial divide, her flesh hollowed by parasitic symbiosis, and voice a melody of sorrow and spores. She serves as a bridge between the waking tribes and the dreaming dead, known to chant the dirges of unborn gods in a language no longer remembered by the living. His twin brothers, Mulgrith and Odrin, fused in a cursed rite, now exist as the Fungamind, a bicephalous oracle entombed in a cradle of coral rot at the center of the withered sanctum. They speak only when the moon bleeds amber, and their riddles shape the doctrine of the Spore-Crypt matriarchs. A bastard nephew, Threxil of the Bloomed Maw, stalks the fungal wilds in exile, speaking only to the rot beasts and marking trees with sigils drawn from his own marrow. Each surviving kin carries a legacy of grotesque suffering and sacred burden, cursed bloodlines rooted in decay, entwined with prophecy, and forever tethered to the Bloomfather's mythos. Vuriel once silenced the Everspire choir with a single breath of her spore song, causing every singer to crumble into salt and bark. Mulgrith and Odrin, as the Fungamind, foresaw the blight of 9 tides and guided the Spore-Crypt tribes through famine by weaving prophecy into rot-woven bread. Threxil of the Bloomed Maw was said to have tamed a glade beast, a fungal colossus believed extinct, and rode it into battle during the sundering of the Crimson Hollow, where he single-handedly routed the Ashen Thorn cult. Their names are invoked in rituals not only as myth, but as divine threats, prayers and warnings etched in rot. Each deed adds to the fungal gospel, their lives bleeding into the vast compost of belief that nourishes the Bloomfather's ever-sprawling legend. These stories are immortalized in the codices of Spore Echo, a sacred anthology sung beneath rootaltars and engraved into the bones of elder mushrooms. Among them, the Rite of the Bloomed Pact recounts how Vuriel's spore song tamed a plague wind that threatened to unmake the spore hearths. The saga of the Ambertide speaks of Mulgrith and Odrin's fungal foresight that turned rot into sustenance during the 9 tides. And the Oath of Thorns chronicles Threxil's ride into the Crimson Hollow, his glade beast's howl etched into every battle prayer. These rites are not merely recitations, but performed enactments, part dirge, part possession. where chosen oracles inhale sacred mold and relive the ancestral agony and triumph as living vessels of fungal memory. Doctrine and belief of Grakmorrow, herald of the blooming silence. Grakmorrow does not prophesy fire, nor ice, nor sword. He speaks of the end as Spore, an era he calls the blooming silence. He first saw it on a battlefield abandoned by time, where the dead lay thick as moss, and the wind carried no birdsong. From the sunken sockets of the fallen, mushrooms bloomed like crowns, and the air throbbed with the soft rhythm of breathless communion. In this velvet hush of the fungal overmind, all sentience is stilled. Thought, he claims, is a disease, identity, a cage. In the coming bloom, flesh shall forget its name, and the mind shall dissolve into the mycelial chorus of unity. To Grakmorrow, rot is not death but absolution. Decay is the final, perfect truth. In sermons whispered from moss-laced pulpits, he teaches that only through surrender to decomposition can the false gods be denied. He sees civilization as an infection, memory as a toxin, and the soul as compost for what must come. In the fungal utopia he envisions, there are no names, no kings, no worship, only spores dancing in eternal recursion, recycling madness into sacred purpose. His followers mark themselves with lichen sigils and stitch mushrooms into their skin. They chant hymns not in words, but in breathy exhales timed to the release of spore. They do not die. They join. In their final breath, they say they feel warmth, not cold, as if the breath of 1,000 quiet voices welcomes them inward. Their bones soften, their thoughts blur, and what remains is not a self, but a song, whispered endlessly in the roots of the world. The world, he says, must be composted to be born anew. Cult structure of the blooming silence, the myco-chant, high priest. Once known by names, now fed to the soil, the myco-chant has wholly dissolved their mortal self into the spore communion. Their body is a cathedral of rot. Tendrils of phosphorescent fungus twine through their flesh, blooming from their sockets and joints. Their veil is not cloth, but a mesh of living lichen and mycelium, constantly shifting in silent pulses. They do not speak often, for their exhalations are laced with spores that guide and shape communal thought. When they do speak, the air grows thick, the ground softens, and listeners weep without knowing why. Their words are not merely sermons, but psychic seeds planted in dreaming minds, often interpreted only after their physical form collapses into fertile ruin and their spirit joins the root thought below. Spore-binders, senior acolytes. Swathed in robes stained with humus and bruised by age, spore-binders tend the sacred rot. Their hands are perpetually stained black by the tending of fungal gardens in temples, where walls sweat decay and altars grow teeth. They oversee the sleeping fields, catacombs where the faithful lie in moist repose, fused to the earth by veins of mycelium, dreaming of dissolution. Spore-binders perform the rite of dampening, singing in clicks and hisses while feeding nutrient slush to the communion beds. Many forget speech, their tongues repurposed by mold. Hollow mouths, evangelists. Each hollow mouth bears the mark of silent sacrament, lips stitched closed with fungal thread that blooms when dampened by breath. They carry incense cages that exude hallucinogenic spores and wear scripture etched on living bark grafted to their backs. They do not preach with words, but with presence. Where they kneel, mushrooms bloom. Some host dream fungi that emit visions directly into the minds of those nearby, seeding the doctrine in sleep and terror. A single nod from a hollow mouth can send a village into a trance. compost-born initiates. Fresh converts endure the rite of shedding, a nightmarish baptism by soil and dissolution. Names are burned upon mushroom caps and consumed by scavenger beetles. Spore needles are pressed into nerve joints, birthing visions of ancient decay and the whisper of the blooming silence. Skin is peeled in symbolic spirals, then laced with symbiotic fungi that pulse in rhythm with the earth. Their past is compost, their future a garden of madness. Only once they have spoken their final dream, the one where they die as a self, are they reborn into the path of silence. Fungal rituals and symbols, the cult of blooming silence. In the shadowed margins of the world of the keeper and the killer, where gods once breathed lightning and memory, a forgotten sect blooms, known in hush and horror as the cult of blooming silence. Reverent of decay, rebirth, and the fungal mind beneath soil and stone, the cult has become an enigmatic counterforce. Its spread hastened by the fall of the famed Skyguard martyr, Varel of the Ashwatch, whose final charge into a mycelial temple ended in madness and bloom. In contrast, Seraphine of the Thorned Eye, a witch-blessed inquisitor, once purged an entire fungal enclave beneath the Saltspire citadel, only to vanish beneath the earth weeks later, leaving behind nothing but a spore-choked statue in her image. These clashes are whispered among survivors and zealots alike, casting the cult not only as heresy, but as prophecy given mold. Whispers persist of a long-buried alliance between the cult and the hollow refrain, a now disbanded sect of Atlas's own kin who were exiled for embracing the doctrines of decay and remembrance. Their betrayal still echoes in some bloodlines, and their forgotten sigils have begun to reappear on fungal altars. Their silent spores thread into the narratives shaped by Atlas, to both divine and martial orders, where the witch commands through riddled prophecy and pyres of faith. The cult unravels such order with quiet corruption. The Skyguards see them as heresy given form, their fungal altars an affront to the solar creed. Whispers also tell of Atlas's descendants who vanished into the root-thick dark, seduced by the promise of Rot's memory. Thus, the cult stands not merely as an ancient aberration, but a growing schism in the mythic balance between storm, silence, and sovereignty. Their practices defy the light and embrace the whispering dark. The softening, a rite of passage, initiates, chosen or condemned, are buried while still breathing beneath moist, spore-rich soil, wrapped in the darkness of the earth, their hearts pounding with panic as the weight of silence swallows them. The air becomes thick with the scent of decay and the stifling warmth of microbial breath, like incense burned in a cathedral to rot, sweet with corruption and heavy as velvet soaked in blood. It clings to the skin, permeates the lungs, and kisses the mind with a surreal intimacy, as if the very act of breathing were a sacrament to decomposition. Each inhale brings spores, invasive and tingling, threading through lungs like whispered tendrils of thought. With each breath, initiates begin to sense not just the present, but echoes of past compost-born, ancestral hallucinations etched into the spore's memory. They hear voices not their own, weeping, laughing, whispering warnings or prayers. The lineage of the cult blooms within them, a haunting choir of decay that binds them to a collective fungal dreamscape stretching beyond time. Terror gives way to delirium. Visions bloom in the dark. Fractured memories, ancestral echoes, and glimpses of the fungal mind whispering its first secrets. Some scream into the dirt. Others weep. A few simply smile, having already surrendered to the root's embrace. Their lungs are deliberately seeded with fungal spores by spore binders, veiled figures who hum in low, resonant tones. If the initiates survive the transformation, lungs coated with living mold, nerves partially rewired by mycelial threads, they are reborn as compost-born, forever linked to the cult's collective dreaming. The mycelial feast, not a banquet, but a revelation. Deep within bioluminescent caverns, the cult gathers. The chamber pulses with sap-stained walls and lichen that glows with sentient light. Upon fermentation warmed altars, crafted from blackened rootwood and inlaid with veins of fossilized sap, the spiral-cut flesh offerings from the willing are laid bare like sacred texts. The altars steam with a pungent heat, fed by slow-burning mycelial braziers beneath. Serrated bone knives and chisel-ended scalpels of translucent chitin, including the infamous blade known as whisper spine, once used in the ritual blooming of a high-born traitor's heart. Each forged from the remnants of battlefield dead and sanctified through fungal alchemy. The bone is sourced from warriors who perished in rot-blessed soil, their marrow replaced with mycelium before harvesting. The preparation is ritualistic and grim. Select corpses are chosen by fungal augurs, often those who died in acts of betrayal, sacrifice, or failed prophecy. Their remains are buried in rot gardens for 7 nights, during which mycelium infiltrates the bone, feeding on marrow and memory alike. On the 8th night, veiled attendants exhume the bodies, chanting hymns of dissolution as the softened skeletons are brought to the hollow warrens for consecrated carving. The chitin is secreted by cathedral-sized hive fungi, cultivated for centuries by blind priest artisans deep within the hollow warrens. Every blade bears a silent curse, etched not in words, but in decay-born patterning. Each cut a communion between blade, flesh, and the dreaming root. Rest nearby, their handles carved with thorn glyphs and fettered in strands of hair and fungus. Each cut upon the offering is a hymn, each placement a stanza in a poem of decay, grotesque and divine. Cloaked spore binders whisper spores into existence, words lost to known languages, and chant exhales that coax fungal growth. The flesh swells grotesquely, birthing fungal towers, twitching stalks, and veined webs of mold. Witnesses enter trances, their minds invaded by shared hallucinations, visions of rot, communion, and an ancient fungal entity they name only in breathless reverence: the deep root. Legends whisper that the deep root is no mere god, its cathedral of rot and song not merely metaphor, but an actual place. The subcavern of Mycelic Varn, a long-lost fungal temple buried beneath the whispering wood, is no longer a secret whispered only by the cult. Rival sects, storm-born loyalists, and witch-anointed scavengers have begun seeking it, some to claim its mythic power, others to annihilate it before its silence sings too loud. The temple, once sacred only to the spore-bound faithful, has become a battlefield of belief and blood, drawing both desperate pilgrims and ironclad purifiers in a slow, spiraling siege where even the walls seem to shift with fungal will. Shaped from petrified roots and bone honeycombed stone, it is said to hum with the weight of dreams and decay. There, fungal spires rise like inverted cathedrals, and glowing spores fall like snow, each flake a memory. Pilgrims who enter rarely return, and those who do speak in riddles and weep lichen instead of tears. The deep root's presence in Mycelic Varn is a communion of hunger and revelation, its roots not only feeding on death, but perhaps shaping destinies. One heretical myth tells of a rogue descendant of Atlas, whose tale has become legend among the cult, passed down not in books, but through spores encoded with memory and tattoos etched into flesh that flowers when the host dreams. Known only as the Spore Seeker, this exile vanished into the Whispering Wood with a relic said to contain stormlight. Their journey, retold in trance and fungal bloom, speaks of communion with the deep root and a transformation so profound it split their identity across multiple compost-born vessels. Cult lore claims their voice can still be heard during the mycelial feast, echoing in the chant-saturated air. A storm-marked exile who sought communion with the deep root, believing that rot held the memory of all storms past. It is said they vanished into the Whispering Wood with a stolen relic and were never seen again, though fungal effigies bearing their likeness have since sprouted in forbidden groves. Some claim a splinter cult, half born of storm and spore, now walks the world, neither loyal to Atlas nor the cult, but harbingers of a new myth, a fusion of decay and fury. But a sentient consciousness beneath the world's crust, older than stars, a slumbering network of fungal thought whose dreams birth spores and whose rage blooms plague. It is said to have first awakened when lightning struck the heart of the Whispering Wood, searing open a vein of memory and decay. Those who claim to have touched its mind describe it as a cathedral of rot and song, vast and wordless, a presence that speaks in hunger and reveals secrets only in the language of withering. To some, it is salvation. To others, apocalypse. The sigil of blooming silence. A cracked skull encircled by spiraling fronds, etched into bone, painted in glowing ink, or left as a carved warning upon desecrated shrines. Its origin is whispered to trace back to the first blooming within the Whispering Wood, where an ancient warrior of Atlas's shattered bloodline fell in battle and was buried beneath the roots. When unearthed decades later, his skull was found entwined with fronds that had grown into its bone, pulsing faintly with bioluminescent memory. The cult took this as a divine omen, the moment when rot remembered its maker. Now, each sigil serves not only as a mark of presence, but as a tribute to that buried sentinel who, even in death, sprouted revelation. Said to bloom in the presence of great stillness or madness, it is feared by other faiths, mistaken by some as a mark of the witch, though the cult claims no gods. Only rot, only rebirth, ties to the world. Some say the cult originated in the Whispering Wood, deep beneath the surface where roots merge with memory. One tale speaks of a forgotten sporebinder, once a disciple of Tekka, who delved too deep in search of ancestral echoes. She performed a ritual meant to silence pain, binding the screams of the dying to the breath of the earth. But something answered her call. The ritual failed, or perhaps it succeeded too well. She was never seen again, but a ring of glowing fungi bloomed where she knelt, and her journal, found years later, was sealed with lichen and written in a language no longer human. Her name, lost to time, is remembered only as the first bloom. Others whisper they were once followers of Tekka, who turned against restraint and sought truth in surrender. Fungal growths have begun to appear on battlefield corpses, unnaturally fast, pulsing with dull biolight. Some scholars and war priests whisper of an emerging pattern. These blooms form glyphs only visible under moonlight, as if spelling warnings or prayers in a forgotten tongue. A theory spreads in hushed tones that the cult is birthing an avatar, a fungal messiah, seeded in flesh and storm, meant to carry the deep root's will into the waking world. Others claim it is not birth, but resurrection, that one of Atlas's storm-born bloodline, thought long dead, is returning as a vessel for the rot. The Skyguard burn these sites, Tika leaves them untouched. Some say out of mercy. Others whisper it is guilt. A few believe she recognizes in the rot something she once called forth in desperation. Or perhaps she fears the silence, knowing it sings in a voice she helped awaken long ago. One she first heard during her hidden conversation with Grakmorrow, the bone seer of the hollow deep, whose teachings have not faded but seeded a new sect within the cult, known as the Hollow-Eared. These silent adherents reject bloom and voice alike, choosing instead to lie motionless in rot gardens and listen to the whispers of the earth. They believe truth lies not in expression but in reception, that the deep root speaks clearest to those who never answer. While the main body of the cult sees them as fanatics, their presence grows, their ears ever pressed to the soil, who warned her that some echoes, once rooted, grow minds of their own. She dismissed it then as madness cloaked in riddles, but now, with each bloom, his warnings haunt her steps like spores riding wind. A single phrase often marks their presence, scrawled in glowing spore ink. When silence blooms, the world remembers. This line was first discovered in the brittle pages of one of Tekka's oldest journals, recovered from a shrine half swallowed by roots and time. The ink, though decades old, still pulsed faintly when exposed to moonlight, suggesting the phrase was not merely written, but grown. Scholars debate whether Tekka recorded it as prophecy, warning, or revelation. Regardless, it has since become a mantra for the cult, echoed in whispers wherever rot takes root. Origins, ash and bloom. The edge of the Ellerin Dunes, near the ruins of a salt-crusted ossuary once used by the salt-born inheritors for memory burial rites. The wind moaned low through broken stone arches, scattering white salt and black spores across cracked flagstones. The salt shimmered in pale drifts like brittle frost, while the spores clung wet and fungal, exhaling a sickly sweet musk that clashed with the acrid tang of old sanctity. Each gust stirred a chorus of quiet crackles and wet squelches, the two substances whispering in conflict, one brittle and preserved, the other damp with promise of decay. At the center of the desiccated plaza stood two figures, one robed in salt-stiff linen, their posture rigid as tomb pillars, silver brands etched into cheeks that had not smiled in a decade, eyes hollowed by generations of duty and dust. The other swathed in wet fungal leathers, their body limber and hunched with the weight of dreams and rot, skin pulsing like root-strangled stone beneath a lattice of pale mushroom veins. Each bore the history of their kind in flesh and gesture, one a monument to the preserved past, the other a herald of blooming oblivion. Silver brands etched into their cheeks, the other swathed in wet fungal leathers, their skin pulsing faintly beneath a lattice of pale mushroom veins. High Curate Thesher of the Saltborn raised his censer. It dripped blue flame, sacred brine hissing from its bronze filigree, and whispered with names of the dead, each syllable a prayer etched in salt and sanctified ash. The censer itself was bound in memory threads, passed down through generations of curates, each thread imbued with the final breath of a dying elder. These silver cords were ritually refreshed with sacred oils and etched with runes only visible in starlight, said to preserve the soul's last memory. In rare cases, when held during fire rites, the censer was known to whisper echoes of ancestral guidance. Shreds of legacy murmured in the heat-warped voices of the long dead. Tiny silver cords braided from the hair of the deceased, meant to trap their essence and preserve it against the gnawing bite of time. Among the Saltborn, decay was feared not merely as death, but as erasure, a betrayal of remembrance. Their relics, ever burning and sealed with alchemical purity, were their answer to rot. A ritual denial, a fire-wrapped defiance. In contrast, the compost-born saw in every flicker of decomposition not an end, but a threshold. You bring rot to sacred soil, Grakmorrow. The compost-born prophet did not blink. I bring return. You worship memory like it cannot lie. But rot. Rot reveals the truth hidden in marrow. Around them, salt-born war priests stood in formation, salt knives bared, the wind curling through their chant of remembrance. Behind Grakmorrow, acolytes with spiral-scarred flesh knelt, their mouths stitched with moss to preserve the blooming silence. Theshar thrust the censer forward. This place remembers. Here, every grain of sand speaks a name. Grakmorrow knelt and pressed one palm to the ground. The soil beneath his fingers trembled, then sighed, a breath long held and newly exhaled. It released a scent like ancient loam mingled with blood-warm sap, as though the earth itself remembered its own forgotten flesh. The ground began to hum faintly, a subsonic rhythm that passed up his arm and into his chest, syncing with the slow pulse of decay blooming through him. Spores hissed from beneath his nails, curling into the soil like living ink. Where his flesh touched earth, rot spread in a spiraling lattice, fungal veins sinking into stone and salt alike. The ground quivered, not violently, but as though it were drawing breath, awakening to his touch. Tiny lichen eyes blinked open in the cracks, and a low murmur, like wet prayer, began to seep from the earth itself. Then let the ground dream again, let it forget. With a shout, the war priests surged forward. The ground burst into fungal towers, grotesque, sinewed structures that resembled spinal arches and rib cages of long-forgotten beasts. Each stalk pulsed with a sickly luminescence, covered in twitching membranes that exhaled spore-laden mist in rhythmic bursts. Veins of dark lichen crawled up their flanks like varicose rot, and beneath their fluted caps, eyes blinked open, milky, lidless things that watched with silent hunger. Riotous growths erupting from salt and bone. One priest was engulfed mid-lunge, screaming as coral-colored mycelium bloomed from his throat. Theshar invoked the rite of salting, a firestorm of powdered flame that seared the air. Compost-born shrieked, but the prophet stood untouched, the rot shielding him in a haze of spore mist. Memory is flame, Theshar bellowed. It burns to sanctify. Memory is mulch, Grakmorrow whispered, and your fire only quickens the bloom. The salt-stained altar cracked, its fractured surface a relic of forgotten conflicts. Once a site of oaths made in fire and betrayals salted into legend. The weight of centuries pressed down on it, threads of ash and sanctified dust woven into every groove, as if even stone remembered the blood spilled for memory's sake. Beneath it, something pulsed, a spore heart buried long ago by Grakmorrow's hand. It was neither flesh nor crystal, but a grotesque synthesis of both. Veined with amber mycelium, encased in a translucent sac that writhed like it breathed. Within, spore filaments floated in viscous fluid, forming the shapes of screaming faces that blinked and dissolved in a slow cycle of torment. As it throbbed, it emitted a resonant hum, not sound, but a vibration in the mind, pulling hallucinations from the air like blood from an old wound. It burst now, and the ossuary screamed. Silence followed, thick, breathing, alive. Not mere absence of sound, but a sacred stillness, the culmination of rot's ritual, the hush that follows revelation. In that moment, it was said the soil listened, the bones of the dunes echoing a forgotten name. This was the blooming silence, not death, but a communion where the divine speaks not in thunder, but in stillness that reshapes the soul. When the mist cleared, only Grakmorrow stood, hunched slightly, as if bearing the weight of ancient grief. His eyes, dark and glazed with spore film, scanned the silent ruin with neither triumph nor pity. A single twitch flickered at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile, but the ghost of one, stretched taut between sorrow and inevitability. And where the war priests had stood, strange flowers grew, as foretold in the compost-born sacred fungus scrolls, the spiraling hymns. Their appearance marked not merely transformation, but a divine verdict. The earth's judgment rendered in bloom. To the faithful, these flowers were signs of apotheosis, known as the ash blossoms of remission, said to only grow where rot has been sanctified and memory surrendered. Their presence here sealed the rite, affirming the prophecy that silence and bloom must one day swallow flame and name alike. Shaped like spirals, their petals glistening with salt and shifting in hue from bruised violet to opalescent green. Each bloom twitched subtly as though breathing, bending gently toward Grakmorrow, as if in reverent recognition. Some turned with the precision of ritual, echoing the tilt of his head. Others opened wider when he passed, revealing stamen that pulsed with light in time with his breath. They did not just react, they responded, mimicking fragments of his final words in broken fungal whispers, as if memorializing his judgment or becoming his silent choir. And a faint, bioluminescent glow pulsed from their hearts in slow rhythm. They whispered in the still air, dry, crackling syllables like prayers uttered through cracked lips, a language of rot and memory spoken by roots, whispers beneath the blooming silence. Teka, known for restraint and remembrance, encountered Grakmorrow in a glade long surrendered to ruin, where the trees wept amber sap like tears of ancient grief and fungus bloomed in obscene coronas along twisted roots. Memory hung there like damp cobwebs, each strand vibrating with the grief of nameless dead, and the air itself tasted of slow decay and forgotten names, with an undertone of bitter myrrh and stale incense. The scent of rites never completed, of sins confessed too late. Underfoot, the mulch whispered secrets in a tongue of rot, clinging to her soles like ancestral regret. Grakmorrow loomed amid the rot like a monument to entropy, not idle but watching, weighing. His presence seeped into the earth like a pact unspoken, a covenant of decomposition. Though he said little, spores drifted in subtle rhythms around him, almost as if awaiting command, and the glade itself pulsed faintly with each breath he drew. There was no crown upon his head, yet the ruin bowed as if acknowledging a sovereign. Whether steward of decay or its architect, Grakmorrow's will radiated through the blight, ancient, deliberate, and deeply patient. His form a shifting lattice of mycelium and bone-pale stalks, cloaked in veils of spore smoke that breathed like lungs. His face, if it could be called that, was a churning mask of fungal growths, each pulsing with the color of dying moons. Beneath a blistered moon, they debated. His spores never dared touch her. Her words never disturbed the ruinous calm he emanated. Unlike others who approached the blooming silence with dread or awe, Teka stood amid the rot with quiet reverence. It reminded her of the breath between raindrops, the hush before morning takes hold. In dreams, she drifted through groves of soft corruption, serene, unflinching. The rot did not repulse her. It whispered not of demise, but of relinquishment. To her, decay was not annihilation, but an unveiling. The slow, reverent peeling back of the world's illusion to expose the marrow truths beneath. In the soft collapse of wood into mulch, she saw echoes of her mother's deathbed, where breath failed gently and memories slipped free like ash in wind. She remembered the ancestral wails sung into bone lanterns, the way their light dimmed not with despair, but with return. What the living call rot, she called revelation, a sacred erosion where all masks, even the sacred ones, fell away. The hushed unraveling of truth beneath the scaffolding of the living. Grakmorrow, in all his grotesque majesty, was no adversary. He was a reflection of what the world buries beneath stone and prayer. That peace in its truest form is not stasis, but return. She left him not with fear or revulsion, but with the silent grace of one who has glimpsed the marrow of all things and found no need to scream. The bloomed throne. Silai the sand-eyed, blind prophetess of Atlas, once dreamt of a bloom devouring her city's domes, not in conquest, but in quiet absolution. It was no siege, it was an erasure. Her vision unfolded in breathless sepulchres of silence, where streets once choked with merchants and oracles lay blanketed in moss-thick spores, and marble towers dissolved beneath ivy threaded with ancestral breath. The domes shimmered like pustules ready to burst, the air tinged with the coppery sweetness of decomposition. Her sanctified city did not fall. It was unmade with grace, as though its theology had been exhaled into dust. Temples bowed not to fire, but to silence, their altars no longer drenched in oil and chant, but veiled in soft mold. Their sacred flames extinguished and replaced with bioluminescent fungi that pulsed with the breath of ancestral spirits. Ritual sigils etched in gold were now etched in lichen, their meanings shifting under the spore light. Where once acolytes intoned hymns to celestial order, now the stone echoed with murmured spore songs, wordless, reverent, and unsanctioned, their doctrines unraveling beneath spores that interpreted prophecy as absolution rather than law. This was not destruction, it was a soft, theological schism, a sacramental undoing. The God her people worshipped remained, but belief no longer clung to scripture. It tangled in ivy and rot, in the breathless spaces where dogma once ruled. Even sanctity proved compostable. When she met Grakmorrow, his presence carried the same cadence. There was no threat, only the certainty of succession. She offered him a place at her feet, not as a subject, but a mirror. Her invitation was one of mutual witnessing, not command. He declined softly, almost kindly, murmuring that soon her temples would crown themselves with bloom, not by blasphemy, but by becoming what they were always meant to reflect. That night, Silai dreamt again. She stood not upon marble, but loam. Her sanctum had become a crypt garden, its stonework weeping black mold like ink. Her blind eyes streamed fertile soil, each tear a root of remembrance. From the altar, something pulsed, not a god, but the hollow echo of reverence reborn. When she woke, she did not smile for peace. She smiled because the mask of certainty had finally cracked. Beneath it, understanding. And in that understanding, the seed of something terrible and true had begun to flower. The rot beneath the spear. Yarvik, the shadow spear, clashed with a hollow-mouthed emissary near a ruined shrine. The battle was brief, brutal, and grotesquely wrong. When his obsidian-tipped spear pierced the emissary's chest, the flesh gave way like rotten parchment soaked in bile. A hiss erupted. Not air, but a living cloud of spores that clung and crawled across his skin, nestling into the seams of his cursed armor. Nocturnus Talon, the weapon forged from an elder dragon's claw and steeped in bloodline-binding maledictions, shrieked, not aloud, but within Yarvik's marrow. The sound was not pain, but memory. Ancestral fury resurrected through steel. Its edge flickered like a shadow denied light, screaming against the spores, not as a blade, but as a sentinel of legacy. A cursed inheritance that whispered of Varos's torments and the madness stitched into Yarvik's blood. Each pulse of fungal air around it drew out the spear's wrath, as if it too feared being forgotten. The emissary's blood was not fluid, but a gelatinous sludge laced with twitching filaments that writhed as if aware, burrowing greedily. When Yarvik snapped the spine, it did not crack. It burst, the sound not unlike an overripe melon dashed upon stone, sending tendrils of fungus spiraling outward like blind serpents. The shrine's air thickened with the scent of old graves and sweet rot. As Yarvik staggered back, the corpse convulsed, its mouth splitting wider than nature permitted, birthing clusters of shivering mushroom caps from throat, eye sockets, even the ragged tears in its abdomen. His armor, etched with curses, sizzled under the fungal advance, glyphs flaring dimly in protest. He felt it, spores slipping past the runes, seeking flesh. And beneath it all, they whispered in languages older than war, threading doubt into his veins. Later, in his sleep, Yarvik walks endless plains of fungal bloom, the sky a veined canopy of rot, veined like parchment over old bone. The earth beneath his feet flexing and pulsing as though it remembers breath. The wind carries voices he once knew, war cries, lullabies, betrayals, now softened into moans of communion. Each whisper burrows beneath his thoughts like worms in wet parchment, unseating names he once held dear and replacing them with fungal hymns and forgotten dialects. His memories begin to fade, not lost, but overwritten, repurposed by the rot. Where once he recalled the scent of rain on obsidian or the sound of his sister's laughter, now there is only the damp echo of mycelium spreading in cathedral stillness. Identity becomes a compost heap of what was, layered with spores of what must come. He sees his brothers, faces half devoured by lichen, their mouths blossoming with soft molds, smiling not in greeting, but in surrender. They reach for him, not in love, but as roots do, inevitable, entangling. Each night, the dreams draw nearer to his waking mind, no longer content to haunt the dark. His hands tremble when idle, not from fear, but yearning. He begins to welcome the descent. He speaks in words not his own, not taught, not remembered, syllables that taste like soil and hum with hunger. In silence, mushrooms sprout from the shadow of his steps, delicate and leering, pulsing with bioluminescent judgment. The dreams no longer end. They bleed into morning like an infection, and Yarvik, once a blade of silence, begins to listen, and almost to kneel. Whether it is a metamorphosis or a surrender, he no longer knows. Each breath feels borrowed, each heartbeat a question. What he once wielded as certainty now frays at the edges, giving way to something vast and root-bound. In the hush between dream and waking, he wonders if he is becoming or being consumed. Future prophecies. Grakmorrow speaks of a day called the Spore Lure, when a crowned child will breathe in decay and exhale forgetfulness over the world. Dreams will die, and the soil will sing. He calls this the final bloom, not an end, but the beginning of peace. Spore-infected regions. the mire groves, a stretch of sunken swampland where the waters are black and still, thick with the voices of the drowned. Dead roots rise like skeletal fingers, and at night, the trees whisper in languages lost to time. Mycelium blooms beneath the surface, weaving glowing sigils that throb with intent. Travelers report the sensation of being watched by the mud itself. Those who leave the mire groves often speak in borrowed tongues or dream vividly of lives never lived. Some grow translucent patches of skin or find that their memories flicker with fungal shapes. The swamp itself resents intrusion. Mossy effigies form spontaneously from roots and vine, mirroring intruders before crumbling into clouds of choking spores, and paths that once led out subtly twist and shift beneath the black waters. Blood chains, rusted and half-submerged, are said to whisper the names of Atlas's forgotten children. Nothing truly dies here. It merely softens and joins. Ruins of Arashtal. Once a golden citadel of scholars and diviners, Arashtal now lies shattered beneath fungal towers that glisten with perpetual dew. The streets are overrun by towering caps and pulsing spore sacs, and its libraries weep mold from their shelves. Forgotten knowledge grows literal roots, and those who read its pages often never return. Some crumble into spores mid-sentence, while others are found days later fused to the shelves, their features distorted into fungal blossoms that echo the contours of forgotten scholars. Some towers have grown into grotesque imitations of the scholars who once inhabited them. Stone faces warped in screams, arms outstretched as if pleading for escape. Heretical Spore-Crypt, mimicking lost doctrines of the apostles, coils around fallen statues, muttering alternate histories. One mold-blistered tome whispers, "The eyes that see shall soon see double, once in flesh, once in fungus." It is said that the city's last archmage sleeps inside a mushroom taller than a cathedral. The Veiled Steps. Perched along sheer cliffs overlooking a forgotten sea, these monasteries were once home to ascetics who meditated in silence. Now their bodies have fused with the stone, their chants replaced by rhythmic spore clouds that drift like incense. Ivy-like fungus grows in elaborate mandalas across the cliff face, glowing during new moons. On those nights, the mural seems to shimmer with the faint outlines of faces frozen in agony and ecstasy, and a low hum like forgotten chants echoes in the wind. Pilgrims often fall into catatonic trances, their bodies locked in place for hours or days, eyes rolled back as they whisper fragments of lost prayers. Some never move again, becoming part of the mural themselves, statues of flesh lacquered in fungal bloom. Beneath the cliffs, fragments of a witch apostle's blade are said to fester, infecting the chants with unholy rhythm. Pilgrims still journey here, not to find wisdom, but to join the mural of decay. The Blooming Scar, a jagged canyon that splits the crimson Badlands in two, where a meteor once struck and seeded the land with alien spores. Bioluminescent stalks now grow in impossible geometries, and every thunderstorm seems to coax them into motion. Locals claim the spores cause waking dreams and uncontrollable empathy. Travelers often wake sobbing with memories that aren't their own. One tale speaks of a soldier who wandered the scar and dreamed vividly of a wedding beneath twin suns, dancing with a partner whose face changed with every step until he awoke with tears, clutching a scorched locket he never owned. Since then, his shadow moves a half-second behind his body, and mirrors no longer reflect his eyes. Worse, he claims colors have inverted for him. Blood runs green, fire burns blue, and straight paths twist unnaturally when walked. The scar is now feared as a gate of unreality, a place where even the curse of Atlas flickers uncertain. His laughter was never heard again. Grey-rot Orchard. Once a thriving orchard of silver apples, now a maze of ashen trees and fruit swollen with rot. The spores here do not kill, but change. Those who eat the fruit begin to hear voices in harmonic trios and see time in layered visions. A cult of rot priests now tends the grounds, offering communion through spore-infused breath and bitter tea brewed from the orchard's core roots. During communion, supplicants often fall into trance-like seizures, their eyes rolling back as they whisper forgotten prayers in tongues not spoken for centuries. Witnesses claim to see shimmering fungal halos crown their heads, and insects form delicate spirals across their skin, vanishing as soon as the vision ends. Some emerge transformed, lucid but haunted, their pupils shaped like seeds, forever murmuring fragments of futures that may never be. One such murmur, "The crow will feast where the crown once stood," was dismissed until a pilgrim king was found lifeless beneath the orchard's oldest tree, his circlet devoured by rust, and his eyes pecked clean. Some believe the rot priests are rewriting memory itself, a rival archive to the keeper's fading truths. Hollowroot Basin, a sunken valley where fungal networks span the canopy and floor like bridges of pulsing flesh. Great cysts rise from the ground and burst with clouds of spores that mimic birdsong, luring wanderers deeper. At its heart lies a still lake covered in translucent mycelial veils. Those who stare into the water too long are said to drown without ever entering it. One tale tells of a priestess who gazed into the lake under a blood moon, her voice soon overtaken by a chorus of whispers no one else could hear. She wanders still, trailing veils of spore light, speaking only in riddles that bloom like mold in the minds of listeners. To some locals, she is a saint of decay, a spirit guide who speaks in rot and rebirth. A fringe sect known as the Chorus of the Spore Shroud has transcribed her utterances into a tome of prophecy called the Mycelium Gospel, using its verses in grotesque rituals involving fermentation of flesh and the binding of fungal growths to bone. They believe each riddle she speaks is a seed of fate waiting to bloom in decay. Others believe she is a cursed omen and leave offerings of salt and iron at the basin's edge to keep her from crossing into their dreams. The Mycelium Gospel now circulates among rogue apostles and memory heretics, each page spattered in ink and ichor. Fungal creature bestiary, echoes of decay, bloom fiends, once hallowed corpses animated by a mycelial will. Bloom fiends stagger through shattered temples and scorched fields, limbs sheathed in living threads of fungus that pulse with an otherworldly rhythm. Their mouths echo forgotten sermons, muttering in tongues no longer spoken, while from their cracked lips drip tendrils of spore-threaded rot. Up close, their fungal embrace is a tapestry of grotesque beauty, glowing hyphae threading through muscle and bone, eyes replaced by wet clusters of glistening, fruiting bodies. Some wear halos of luminous caps, casting holy rot across the dark. When they find the dying, they do not kill. They seed, whispering secrets of rebirth through decay as the flesh blossoms into new fungal life before the heart stills. Myco-wraiths. Shadows stitched from memory and mold. Myco-wraiths drift where trauma lingers. Not spirits, but sentient grief animated by fungal tethers. Their touch leaves no wounds, only absences, eating thought like dry rot through a beam. Victims are left intact, but hollow, their voices tangled with those of long-dead ancestors. Some begin to mimic the gestures and tics of the long dead, speaking in fragmented prayers or staring blankly at invisible companions. Their eyes glaze with a film of gray, and their reflections vanish in water. Even Tekka avoids the places they gather, for the past they carry is hungrier than death. Sporehounds. Once war beasts, now fungal horrors reborn with bioluminescent veins and shuddering mushroom eyes. They prowl old battlegrounds and ruined sanctuaries, drawn to blood and prayer alike. Their howls vibrate the spores in the air, triggering hallucinations and madness in all but the Stormborn. Prolonged exposure warps not only the mind, but the very nature of those nearby. Villages dissolve into silence and superstition, where people no longer speak but weep through fungal masks. Temples overgrown with twitching moss sing back in twisted mimicry of old chants. Animals mutate, their bodies sprouting translucent spore antlers or eyes grown shut with caps. Some say Atlas once tried to tame them. The scars suggest he failed. Cap lords, great fungal titans that rise from ecosystems laid to ruin. Cap lords are the final sermon of rot. Their bodies spiral with layers of dead matter and sacred spore, taking on forms reminiscent of fungal cathedrals. Arches of lichen-draped bone, bulbous domes crowned in glowing caps, and ribbed limbs echoing broken cloisters. Their breath is a miasma that stills thought and faith alike. Tekka once watched a town kneel to one, unbidden, as if compelled by the grief of the land itself. Around them, decay arranges itself like a temple of surrender. They speak in silence, commanding lesser fungal forms through the tremor of memory. Spore-mirths. Small as children, cruel as forgotten gods. Spore-mirths swarm with erratic joy, their laughter high and shattering. They feed on happiness, leaving only fogged minds and crying sleep. In the wild places of Netheris, their songs are considered curses. Villages that host their dances grow silent over time, inhabitants losing the will to sing, to speak, even to weep. Priests report dreams of weeping stone faces and joyless banquets. Temples fall to ruin not from age, but neglect, as caretakers wander off into the woods, chasing laughter that only they can hear. Some say they are dreams given flesh. Others claim they are the forest's way of remembering too much. Moldermanes, lumbering brutes clad in spore-woven hides. Moldermanes are fungal constructs raised from the remains of ancient beasts. Bone, bark, and cap congeal into forms that stagger beneath their own weight. They guard deep mycelial groves and fungal shrines, driven not by orders, but by dream echoes of forgotten druids. Their roars are low, like trees snapping in winter. Rot-callers, priest-like entities of the fungal creed. Rot-callers move with eerie grace, their limbs spindled and cloaked in shivering veils of mildew. They speak only in pulses, emitting rhythmic waves that cause fungus to bloom around them. When they chant, decay spreads in sacred geometry, spiral glyphs of rot inscribed into the living earth. Their pulses mimic verses from long-lost hymns and liturgies, rewritten in spores and mold. To some, they are rewriting faith, delivering sermons of entropy that dethrone old gods and enthrone the void. The devout of Atlas sometimes mistake them for prophets. Spinecaps, ambush predators hidden among fungal blooms. Spinecaps resemble piles of innocent mushrooms until disturbed. When prey nears, they erupt with a halo of spore quills, piercing flesh and mind. Their poison is not fatal, but mnemonic. It floods the victim with memories not their own. Few survive the overdose of lives they never lived. Those who do often emerge irrevocably changed, adopting speech patterns, rituals, even forgotten skills from the dead, whose echoes now live inside them. Some forget their own names and identities entirely, wandering the wilds, reciting battles or lullabies from centuries past, hollow vessels inhabited by borrowed lives. Hive lords, rare, ancient intelligences buried beneath the oldest groves. Hive lords never move. They think in centuries, speak through networks, and dream of molding the world in mycelial image. Their dreams birth forests that bleed amber and rains that whisper forbidden hymns. Thought alone bends roots and bone in grotesque synchrony. Cities shift subtly off their foundations. Insects march in sacred patterns. And dreams become sermons not meant for waking minds. The largest fungal outbreaks are often their will made manifest. If cap lords are generals, hive lords are gods. They do not fight. They convert. The silence bloom. A legendary anomaly, the silence bloom is said to be a flower that grows only where a bloom fiend dies in peace. It emits no sound, no scent, only a stillness so deep it unravels spells and calms storms. Some say it is a gift of forgiveness from the fungal mind. Others believe it is bait for something far older. Myths vary across cultures. In the drowned temples of Esthaler, it marks the graves of saintly martyrs said to have defied death itself. In the obsidian halls of the Windshade archivists, it is believed to bloom where forbidden knowledge was buried alive. Some say that to dream beside it is to see a god's memory, while others whisper that to touch it is to vanish, not from life, but from all memory. Short tale, a mold-born's path. He was once Elior, a scribe of Virellon, a city where ink ran thicker than blood, and parchment was pressed from the skin of the condemned. Virellon's governance was a braided hierarchy of flesh clerics, memory keepers, and echo chancellors, each vying for primacy over the interpretation of history etched into sacred vellum. Theocratic councils held midnight conclaves beneath cathedral vaults of bone glass, where ink pulsed like blood through living tomes and sentences were sung into animate scrolls that wrapped around the guilty. Heretics were not merely executed, they were rewritten, their flesh transfigured into parchment for confession, their memories siphoned and grafted into the dreaming archives. And heresies were archived, not erased, whispered only through blood oaths and censured rites. Its spires rose like rib cages from a dying beast, and beneath them, scribes etched memory into flesh-script scrolls to keep madness at bay. In dreams, he saw moss sprouting from his ink, pale green tendrils exhaling the scent of rot and rain, whispering secrets in a language no longer spoken by the living, twining themselves into the shapes of broken hourglasses and inverted sigils known only to the keepers, each frond unfurling like forgotten prayers etched in mold, pulsing with a strange, fevered life. He followed the spores to the Hollowmouth, a gaping entity draped in wilted veils of fungal silk, its maw a cathedral of teeth and bone chimes. Eyes like fossilized suns blinked sideways, symbols of the Mycelic Deep, an ancient pantheon whose silent sermons once rivaled the witches' apostles for dominion over the decay-born faithful. Some heresies claim they predate the witch entirely, vestiges of a pre-cataclysmic theology buried by apostolic zeal and time's erosion of the Mycelic Deep, the ancient pantheon of fungal demigods said to dwell in rot-hallowed catacombs beneath the eastern barrows. Their gaze bore the weight of forgotten sermons, and through the Hollowmouth, they offered sacraments of silence to those chosen to carry decay as gospel. As it pressed thorned fingers of bark and rust into his lips, sealing silence with sacrament. buried alive. He woke beneath loam, lungs stung by breathless decay. In the suffocating dark, he saw visions etched in bioluminescent mycelium, ancestral faces carved from lichen, whispering verdicts in spore speech. Each breath filled his veins with root light and memory rot, until his heartbeat echoed the fungal pulse of the underworld. In that trial, Elior unraveled, not dying, but blooming. He now walks, nameless, with spores blooming where tears once fell, each a vessel of echoing memory that clings to breath and wind. They whisper to those who dream too deeply, recounting forgotten laments and dead names, infecting silence with the lull of voices long extinguished, remnants of a sorrow so ancient it fermented into something sacred. Each bloom a quiet hymn to grief too deep to die, echoing the rites of the ash binding. A funeral liturgy forbidden by the keepers, wherein mourners weep into spores and chant forgotten names, seeding memory into rot and binding sorrow to soil, spreading not rot, but reverence. When he exhales, children forget their names and smile, their minds blooming with alien memories not their own. Elders whisper that his breath carries fragments of the lost cycle, a cyclic curse chronicled in veiled codices, where each recurrence heralds the unraveling of memory across generations, names unremembered, oaths unkept, and a return to the silent chaos before the first script was etched, a mnemonic plague once penned and purged by the Virilan archivists, first unleashed during the archivist schism, when rogue scribes weaponized remembrance itself, erasing the bloodlines of dissident noble houses by overwriting their ancestral names with void script glyphs that devoured memory like rot, now returning in the spores of a forgotten sun. Symbology of the cult. The sigil of silence. First manifesting on the ossified brow of the martyr of Mute Vale, a saint whose shattered jaw preserved the unspeakable spore truths whispered in trance. The sigil embodies the paradox of sacred silence. While most venerate it as a symbol of devotion and restraint, some sects argue it traces back to the unheard choir, a heretical order believed to have embraced the bloom as contagion incarnate. The emblem, a cracked jawbone circled by fern tendrils, is carved into stone or bone relics and placed at fungal shrines. Its name is never uttered, for legend holds even a whisper can awaken latent spore awareness, birthing hallucination or psychic rupture. On the ossified brow of the martyr of Mute Vale, a saintly figure whose jaw was shattered to prevent her from divulging the spore truths she received in sacred trance. Controversy surrounds its origin, however, as some sects claim the sigil was first used by the unheard choir, a heretical order that vanished into the fungal catacombs centuries ago, believed to have embraced the bloom as both god and contagion. While the mainstream cult venerates the sigil as a seal of devotion and silence, dissenting whispers speak of it as a warning, a sign not of sanctity, but of surrender to madness. On the ossified brow of the martyr of Mute Vale, a saintly figure whose jaw was shattered to prevent her from divulging the spore truths she received in sacred trance. The sigil, a cracked jawbone circled by fern tendrils, is chiseled into stone or etched into bone relics and placed at the heart of fungal shrines. It is never spoken aloud. Legend warns that even whispering it can awaken dormant spore awareness in the infected, triggering hallucinations or psychic blooming. Cracked jawbones circled by fern tendrils. This emblem is chiseled into stone or etched into bone relics and left at the center of fungal shrines. It is never spoken aloud. Legend warns that even whispering it can awaken dormant spore awareness in the infected, triggering hallucinations or psychic blooming. Spore-Crypt. A language cultivated, not written, formed through coaxed growths of mold and lichen on treated skin or memory tree bark. Spore-Crypt shifts when inhaled, revealing meanings shaped by the reader's emotions. Despair may unveil ancestral laments. Rage often births visions of fire and devouring roots. Longing opens dream doors to memories never lived. Those who read with joy or awe may perceive angelic forms in the lichen folds, or witness the birth of new fungal stars. Often, reading a text induces trance-like states or grotesque dream visions, where knowledge unfolds like a blooming wound or a choir of spore-tongued saints. Interpretations vary across cultic sects. To some, the script is divine communion. To others, it is a parasitic whisper, drawing the soul toward dissolution. This ideological rift has led to schisms within the faith, with certain enclaves banning Spore-Crypt entirely, claiming it erodes will and identity beneath its lichen veil. Cult colors, mold green, worn during rites of shedding, where initiates bathe in spore mist and chant their old names into fungal hollows, letting go of former identities. It is the hue of Moss Mother, the transformation patron, whose eyes are carved into the trunks of memory trees. Bone white, used in the sacrament of forgetting, where cultists inscribe memories into bone slivers and cast them into silent pits. This color belongs to Pale Requiem, the saint of sacrificial memory, whose relic jawbone is encased in a lichen tomb. Decay brown, donned during burial vows and communion with sanctified remains, marking when decay becomes divine nourishment. It is the shade of Rotfather, who teaches that only through digestion by earth can souls be reborn. Bioluminescent blue, reserved for the rare communion with the spore mind. Garments and tattoos glow faintly during trance rituals. The light is said to mimic the breath of Yuliath, a whispering shade believed to dwell in the canopy roots of the oldest bloom temples. These colors are layered into robes, body inks, and mixed with mycelial resin, which pulses dimly during rituals. Outsiders often misinterpret these rites as necromantic or blasphemous, equating the ceremonies with death cults or fungal possession. In border towns, tales twist the cult's aesthetic into nightmarish myths. Pilgrims wrapped in glowing tendrils, whispering forgotten names to the soil. Yet others see them as divine envoys, cloaked in the language of decay, bearers of hidden wisdom glimpsed only through decomposition and trance. Body inks and mixed with mycelial resin, which pulses dimly during rituals. Rot braids, cords woven from decomposing vines and flora, braided into the hair of senior acolytes. Each braid embeds a shard of bone or fungal fang, symbols of truths surrendered to the bloom. Over time, these braids rot and unravel, revealing their sacred contents like lesions of confession. Their decay is celebrated within the cult. The more decomposed the braid, the greater the reverence. This visual unraveling serves as a mark of both rank and piety. Some cults enshrine the fallen braids in fungal reliquaries, believing their remnants whisper dormant wisdom. Decomposing vines and flowers, braided into the hair of senior acolytes. Each braid holds a shard of bone or fungal fang, offerings symbolizing a personal truth surrendered to the bloom. As the cultist ages, the braids begin to rot and unravel, exposing the embedded tokens like sacred lesions. This decay is viewed as a holy unveiling, the inner truth breaking free from the husk of secrecy. Within the cult's hierarchy, the state of a cultist's braids is not just cosmetic, but symbolic. The more rotten and unraveled the braids, the more revered the bearer. Decay is exalted as proof of surrender, and those with the most decomposed braids are seen as closest to the spore mind's revelation. Some cults even preserve fallen braids in fungal shrines, believing they continue to whisper truths. Decomposing vines and flowers, braided into the hair of senior acolytes. Each braid holds a shard of bone or fungal fang, offering symbolizing a personal truth surrendered to the bloom. As the cultist ages, the braids begin to rot and unravel, exposing the embedded tokens like sacred lesions. This decay is viewed as a holy unveiling, the inner truth breaking free from the husk of secrecy. Some braids fall away entirely, leaving mycelial scars behind, physical imprints of confession and transformation. Woven from decomposing vines and flowers, braided into the hair of senior acolytes. Each braid holds a shard of bone or fungal fang, offerings symbolizing a personal truth surrendered to the bloom. Echo relics, jawless skulls, cracked bells, or fragmented harps that resonate faintly when near spores. These relics trigger buried memories or visions. Some believe they are echoes of the spore mind's voice. Lichen seals, living glyphs grown over doors, graves, or memory wells. They glow faintly and hiss when neared by the uninitiated. Breaking one triggers transformation in 3 grotesque stages: fever dreams and spore-borne visions, the sprouting of mycelial filaments along the spine, and finally, the etching of pale blue script across the skin as communion with the spore mind begins. Initiates reborn through this rite become either sealed voices, venerated and cryptic seers, or blooming wretches, feared for their contagious revelations. Communities remain split. To some, these figures are holy, their silence sacred. To others, they are pariahs, decayed vessels of a mind not their own. Grown over doors, graves, or memory wells. They glow faintly and emit a warning hiss when approached by the uninitiated. Breaking one is believed to trigger infection, revelation, or both. The transformation unfolds in stages. The initiate first suffers fever dreams and hallucinations, followed by the emergence of mycelial filaments along their limbs and spine. In the second stage, their pupils cloud with spore dust, and their skin begins to pulse with pale blue script. The final stage is marked by an irreversible communion with the spore mind, a rite performed beneath bioluminescent canopies, where the initiate breathes in sacred rot and chants of release. Those reborn this way may be revered as sealed voices, emissaries of fungal truth, or feared as blooming wretches, marked for isolation and watched for signs of contagion. Communities debate their sanctity, seeing either divinity or defilement in their glowing veins and quiet, dreaming stares. Grown over doors, graves, or memory wells, they glow faintly and emit a warning hiss when approached by the uninitiated. Breaking one is believed to trigger infection, revelation, or both. Those spiritually infected often develop mycelial growths along their veins and behind the eyes, granting visions stitched from ancestral memories and alien hymns. Some are driven mad, others enlightened, reborn with voices that hum in chorus with the spore mind, skin etched with bioluminescent script. It is said the most blessed can no longer speak, for their breath becomes a carrier of dreams and contagion alike. Glyphs grown over doors, graves, or memory wells. They glow faintly and emit a warning hiss when approached by the uninitiated. Breaking one is believed to trigger infection, revelation, or both. Historical timeline of Grakmorrow's rise. Year 0, the listening. Grakmorrow vanishes from the University of Eladair. His final lecture, preserved in a ruined archive, ends mid-sentence, trailing into a diagram of fungal symbiosis overtaking the human brain. The disappearance sends shockwaves through the academic elite and governing clergy alike. The lecture hall is sealed, declared a sanctum of contamination and heresy. Within days, Elader's Senate dissolves into suspicion and inquiry, sparking purges of minds touched by decay. Pilgrims in mourning garb gather outside the ruined lecture wing, whispering prayers into fungal offerings, while underground cults claim the event marks the birth of a new cognitive epoch, one where thought and rot intertwine. A splinter faction of scholars, calling themselves the Ascendant Mycologians, emerge soon after, arguing that Grakmorrow did not vanish but transcended mortal perception, becoming the first to fully bloom into sapient spore consciousness. Their treatises, written in fungal etchings and memory weave, provoke bitter academic wars and sectarian violence. Grakmorrow's name becomes both taboo and talisman in scholarly circles, inked in red and spoken only through veils, dividing academia between those who mourn and those who venerate. Year 3, the whisper beneath skin. Corpses from a plague-racked village are discovered with sermons etched into their bones in a language unknown to any living scholar. Fungal blooms erupt from the eye sockets, curling into grotesque spirals of mycelial script that writhe with the moist shimmer of decay. As the bodies rot, the fungus mutates further, forming jawless mouths from spore flesh that whisper the sermons aloud in voices too cracked and resonant to belong to the dead. Year 7, the Fraying Choir. A small town on the Ellerin border is found devoid of life, yet filled with harmonic moaning from beneath the floorboards. The sound persists even after the town is burned, leading neighboring regions to construct ritual barriers of salt and silver around their borders. Some noble houses declare the site a cursed relic and bar access, while fringe cults begin pilgrimages to hear the hymn of forgetting. The moaning spreads like a contagion, echoed in the dreams of nearby villages, etched into stone by the mad, and eventually translated into a chant used by bloomfiends as battlefield canticles. In Viralan, the luminant theocracy declares the sound heretical, enforcing silence wards and executing any who dare record its rhythm. In contrast, desert theocracies along the Red Dunes claim the moaning as a divine lament of the god Atlas, orchestrating elaborate listening rites to absorb its truth. Merchant princes in Kelthar monetize the hysteria, marketing moan-imbued relics to nobles and cultists alike. Even the Order of the Ashbinders fractures, half declaring the moan a death knell, half building cathedrals tuned to its resonance. The choir becomes a polarizing hymn, fracturing realms into those who worship, those who weaponize, and those who burn in dread. A small town on the Ellerin border is found devoid of life, yet filled with harmonic moaning from beneath the floorboards. The first signs of coordinated bloomfiends are recorded. Year 12, the wrought birth of Hollowmouths. Silent evangelists appear in 3 distant nations at once. Their presence coincides with mass hallucinations and spontaneous fungal outbreaks in temples and graveyards. Witnesses report visions of endless halls veined with glowing mycelium, voices reciting forgotten names in polyphonic whispers, and sensations of wet soil pressing gently against their lungs as if preparing them to bloom. Many wake weeping spores, unable to speak without releasing clouds of dream-sick breath. Others claw out their own eyes, murmuring praise to shapes seen only in decay. Year 16, the Ashfall Accord. The Virellan Luminants attempt to seal blooming silent scriptures in a sunken vault. Within a week, the vault's steel melts and spores infest the sealant's lungs. Virellan names Grakmorrow a meta-pantheon-class threat. Year 19, the Wilted Crusade. The Thorns of St. Kelrith march into the Vale of Moaning Roots. Their crusade lasts 6 days. Survivors emerge changed, silent eyes glowing faint blue, trailing mold with each breath. Their return fractures the faithful. Some exalt them as divine vessels reborn in mold-laced grace, while others recoil, denouncing them as blasphemous husks. Entire temples are split by the schism, leading to nights of bloodlit purges and feverish awakenings, where priests are found murmuring fungal scripture in sleep. The affected breathe in rhythm, pulse in unison, and seem to bleed memory instead of blood. Governments hesitate, unsure whether to exile, sanctify, or dissect. Paranoia and reverence bloom in equal measure. The Thorns of St. Kelrith march into the Vale of Moaning Roots. Their crusade lasts 6 days. Survivors emerge changed, silent, eyes glowing faint blue, trailing mold with each breath. Year 22, the Mycelic ascends. A village disappears from maps. Scrying reveals it has become a single breathing organism, fungal, aware, and rooted in the collective thoughts of its former citizens. From its center emerges the Mycelic, a sermon sculptor of rot and revelation. It does not speak with voice, but with spores. Each inhalation induces visions of ancestral memories twisted by decay. Lovers dissolving into moss, prayers devoured by mildew, and skies blooming with mold. It walks not on feet, but on the reverence of thought itself, unraveling nearby realities into spore dreams where the devout awaken as gardens. Whole archives rewrite themselves in its presence, words turning to mycelium, scripture to scent. It does not convert, it infects purpose. Year 23, the blooming schism. Former spore binders fracture into cultic sects, each claiming to carry the true message of the Overmind. The verdant gospelists believe that the Overmind must be worshipped through artistic decomposition. They carve wrought icons into the bones of the dead and wear veils of living moss. In opposition, the Echo Grievers view the fungal chorus as a heretical echo of lost purity, using iron-threaded garb and memory-sealing tattoos to preserve human identity against the spore tide. The two sects engage in memory duels, psychic conflicts, where archival thoughts are weaponized in ritual arenas. Myco-wraith storms ravage archives as memories battle, and each crumbling tome becomes a battlefield of doctrine. Year 32, Durnhall's collapse. The towers of Durnhall Keep fall silent. Lightning storms spiral unnaturally overhead for 7 days. Survivors speak of black-veiled heralds planting hymnal fungi in dreamers' mouths. Tekka is glimpsed in the catacombs, weeping into a mold-wrapped book. Witnesses claim the spores on the pages glowed with shifting sigils, each glance revealing different passages to different minds. Some say her tears seeded new glyphs across the parchment, birthing what has come to be called the Codex of Lament. This moment has since fractured belief systems. One faction, the Sibilants, claims the Codex foretells Tekka's martyrdom and the final dissolution of memory into the bloom. Another sect, the Hand of the Ashroot, believes Tekka weeps not in despair but in defiance, and that the Codex contains the hymns to bind the Mycelic. Pilgrimages now flood the lower catacombs, each seeker hoping to witness a new revelation sprouting from Tekka's sorrow. Year 39, the Guilt Reclamation. Descendants of Atlas's bloodline, the Chainborn, begin reclaiming fungal blighted ruins. They wear thunder-forged armor etched with sigils that crackle faintly when near rot. Their rituals involve standing in lightning-charged rain, chanting counter-hymns laced with static and sorrow, melodies said to unravel the memory webs spun by the blooming silence. These hymns do not merely disrupt fungal growth, they reorient the minds of those nearly lost, invoking ancestral grief as a spiritual cleansing. The Chainborn believe suffering is the storm's most sacred gift, and through pain, clarity. Their doctrine stands in solemn defiance of the Bloomfiend Creed, which sees unity through decay and communion via dissolution. While Bloomfiends dissolve identity into spore symphonies of shared memory, the Chainborn resist obliteration with hymns of personal agony and ancestral grief. Their chapels are carved from fallen towers and ringed with saltfire altars, built atop bones rather than roots. Each ritual begins with the burning of a memory thread, personal relics offered in rejection of fungal destiny. Their leader bears a relic said to pulse with grief, a shard of a broken medallion once held by Tekka, which throbs in mourning whenever a Chainborn falls in battle, reminding all that memory is not meant to be shared, but endured. Descendants of Atlas's bloodline, the Chainborn, begin reclaiming fungal blighted ruins. They wear thunder-forged armor and chant counter hymns laced with static. Their leader bears a relic said to pulse with grief, a shard of a broken medallion once held by Tekka. Year 44, the Verdant Siege. Bloomfiends surround the floating monastery of Netheris. Pixiekin archives bleed spores into the sky, warping stars into fungal constellations, vast shifting patterns that pulse with bioluminescent logic. Navigators go mad trying to chart them. Compasses drift as if bewitched. Pilgrims see saints' faces blooming in the skies, their weeping eyes weft with mycelium. Spellcasters report their incantations altering mid-ritual, reshaped by the pattern above. Some call it divine revelation, others a mind plague of the heavens. In response, the Academy of Thorned Spheres splintered, some scholars embracing the fungal maps as living grimoires, while others declared them cosmic heresy. The storm-clad astromancers of Keldal began tracing new rites in the sky mold patterns, while the silent circle of Durnhall fled to caverns, denouncing the heavens as profane. The fungal constellations do not merely distort faith, they breed new doctrines in madness, each one a baroque blossom of celestial decay. Atlas awakens again, drawn by a child's scream echoing from a ruin sealed in moss. Bloomfiends surround the floating monastery of Netheris. Pixiekin archives bleed spores into the sky, warping stars into fungal constellations. Atlas awakens again, drawn by a child's scream echoing from a ruin sealed in moss. Year 50, present day, the blooming silence now sprawls beneath empires. The Myco-chunt sings in 10 tongues, each utterance a living script that reweaves matter into memory. Stones forget their weight, rivers dream of flowing upward, and minds exposed to the song awaken with foreign lifetimes etched behind their eyes. In the salt-mined cathedrals of Shire Karn, monks dissolve their architecture into spores, choosing spiritual sublimation over stone permanence. Meanwhile, the industrial forges of Ironhold now lie silent, their machinists mute and still, all afflicted by memories that were never theirs, kneeling to visions of fungal prophets. Even the floating courts of Netheris have banned speech entirely, claiming that to speak over the Myco-chunt is to unravel reality's script. Cities crumble not from siege, but from belief reshaped by spores. What was once prophecy now manifests as biological scripture. In Kelthar, the aqueducts wail in harmony with the song, shifting course as if mourning lost futures. A shattered mask burns in a spore pyre near Thiranal, its smoke forming sigils visible only to the sleep-starved. Invitation is no longer metaphor. It is a psychic summons, etched in decay and whispered through dreams. Come and bloom, or be forgotten. Across the rotting spires of the Bloomspire Convent, fungal apostles now scribe living decrees into the skin of volunteers, formalizing the Mycelic summons into a sacred rite called the Last Germination. In the marsh-shrouded barracks of the Verdant Guard, soldiers recite its lines before battle, believing death in bloom ensures eternal resonance. Meanwhile, avant-garde architects in the moss-blanketed ruins of Listarn shape buildings into spore-song-echoing cathedrals, interpreting the invitation as a call to embrace decay as art. Each faction sees the message not just as prophecy fulfilled, but a mandate, spiritual, martial, and cultural, to merge with the final hymn of the fungal eschaton. Blooming silence now sprawls beneath empires. The Myco chant sings in 10 tongues. Storm-marked children vanish into mist. In the spired city of Virilan, seers declare them chosen vessels of the last echo, sent to bloom anew within the Overmind's dream. The Chainborn, however, brand them as sacrificial heralds, doomed to become spore-bound oracles of ruin. Fringe sects in the blighted marches believe the children dissolve into fungal stars, birthing new constellations to guide the faithful. Meanwhile, grim warnings circulate in Keldal. A child taken by the mist always returns, but never twice with the same soul. Each culture sees in them either salvation or slow oblivion, saints, soldiers, or spectral warnings of what memory must become. In Kelthar, the aqueducts wail. A shattered mask burns in a spore pyre near Thiranal. The final bloom is no longer prophecy, it is invitation. Trade routes decay into root-choked silence. Once bustling ports, now fungal deltas, where merchants barter in spores and dream salts. Governments dissolve as fungal cults supplant bureaucracies, their decrees whispered through spore motes carried on the wind. Markets collapse under the weight of bio-miracles, edible breath, weeping bread, flesh that sings. Entire cities abandon architecture in favor of sentient gardens, while dissenters vanish into moss-choked tribunals. What remains of order now negotiates not with laws, but with hymns, each stanza a pact of survival or surrender. The Moldkin host, fungal warriors of Grakmorrow. Grakmorrow, bearer of the spore maul of Sepsis Rex, leads the Moldkin host, a grotesque, reverent legion of fungal symbiotic warriors forged through ritual infection, genetic memory, and devotion to decay. Born from the rot ash of a forgotten plague moon, Grakmorrow was not raised but cultivated, his flesh braided with mycelial cords that whispered in ancient dialects of entropy and bloom. The spore maul is not a weapon, but a sentient relic, an entity with a will, its pitted surface alive with sibilant growths that murmur to him in sleep and silence. Each swing of the spore maul warps his senses, overlaying visions of decay onto the living. He sees rot not as destruction, but as divine expression. Where others see cities, he sees husks ripe for blooming. Where others see death, he sees communion. The weapon pulses in his grip, not with heat, but with desire, eager to spread its spore-born gospel into bone and soil alike. Their campaign is not merely conquest, but sacred infestation, a rebirth by rot, and a sermon written in spores and blood. Warrior types, spore callers, psychic war chanters who orchestrate the battlefield through spore song, a low harmonic resonance woven with fungal pheromones and ancestral echoes. Their voices are honed by decades of communion with the mycelium choir, a network of ancient, sentient fungi whose language can drive untrained minds to madness. The choir imprints rhythms directly into the chanter's bones, causing their marrow to resonate and hum with unnatural cadence. Emit hallucinogenic and coordination spores that swirl in visible tendrils of phosphorescence, wrapping around their bodies like translucent, whispering serpents. When their chants rise, enemies suffer cranial ruptures from cognitive overload, blood leaking from their ears and eyes as traumatic memories are dredged up and replayed in endless loops. Some advanced spore callers embed grief motifs that mimic the psychic weight of bereavement, collapsing enemy morale in waves of shared hallucinated funerals. Cholhim the Resonant, revered as the dirge wraith, wore a cloak of woven lichen that pulsed like an exposed heart. During the Battle of Hollow Tread, he perched on a stone outcropping and sang a sorrow dirge into the abyss for 7 days, his voice breaking and reforming into a chorus of ancestral ghosts. The canyon resonated until fissures opened, revealing a fungal maw, hundreds of myco teeth grinding in anticipation. When 3 enemy battalions arrived, entranced by the lingering echo, they stepped into the rift and were digested alive in a slurry of black spores and psychic wailing. It is said that Cholhim's throat finally tore on the last note, and from it, a new breed of auditory fungus grew, still humming his lament beneath the stone. Capshroom sentinels, heavily armored infantry encased in layered fungal plating, resembling knotted bark and fibrous stone. Each sentinel's armor was not worn. It is grown, layer by agonizing layer, from within. The process begins with the implantation of mycospores beneath the skin, which root through muscle, bone, and sinew, excreting resinous armor as a protective crust. Over decades, their flesh fuses with their armor, bones distorting, joints calcifying, eyes often blinded by overgrowth. They speak only in fungal groans and breathe through hollowed-out tubes of lignified tracheal bark. In battle, their presence is nightmarish, towering silhouettes shuffling with the weight of overgrown bark, trailing misty threads of rot. Their footfalls sprout quick spore blooms, and the scent of damp, coppery decay heralds their approach. When mortally wounded, their fungal core implodes in a grisly explosion. Viscera liquefies, plating cracks, and a violent burst of spores erupts outward in choking clouds. The spores are either regenerative, bringing life to corrupted moldkin soil, or virulent, melting the lungs of nearby foes with fast-growing mycotoxins. Molthug Gravetiller, a veteran of the Verdant Uprising, became legend by holding a rotted ford for 6 days alone, half his body encased in wrought iron bark and his gut consumed by symbiotic slime molds. When he finally collapsed, his death was so violently fertile that a new species of sentient capshrooms exploded from his remains, shrieking, cap-headed homunculi who still chant his name. They formed a haunted grove known as the Gravetiller Ring, where the trees bear human teeth and the wind hums with whispered sermons of decay. It is said any who lie within its roots will never rot, only bloom eternally in fungal remembrance. Rust beetle cavalry, rapid assault troops mounted on grotesquely swollen armored beetles, whose carapaces are crusted with metallic pustules and ridged with rusted spines. These insects are bred in vats of oxidized blood and fed on grave iron and old war relics, their bodies infused with necrofungi that digest steel and excrete corrosive enzymes. When deployed, the rust beetle cavalry swarms the battlefield in a cacophony of clanking mandibles and acidic hiss. Their mounts release clouds of rusting vapor from abdominal vents, instantly corroding weapons, armor, and bone. Those caught in their charge suffer not just chemical burns, but are often fused to their weapons as metal melts into flesh. The screeches of decaying war machines echo long after the swarm has passed, and the air remains thick with the scent of blood copper and boiled marrow. Cybrax, the corrosion herald, shrouded in a ragged cloak made of flayed servo skin and rust chainmail, led a legendary assault on the Iron Crucible, a fortress defended by mechanized titans. His beetle, a monstrosity the size of a chapel, was embedded with reactor shards and spored with war hymns etched into oxidized chitin. When it reared and exhaled, entire sections of the wall liquefied into sludge. The titans themselves fell, their gears gummed with corrosive slime, their pilots screaming as their suits fused shut from the inside. Cybrax's steed was eventually entombed mid-battle, its final breath rusting the air into crimson fog. The beast's shell now serves as an altar, worshipped by corrosion priests who flay offerings of copper from the willing. Sporeworm riders, aerial executioners astride rotting serpentine beasts, the sporeworm riders descend from choking skies like omens of doom. Each rider is surgically fused to their worm, their flesh melded with fungal sinew and chitinous clamps to ensure perfect neural control. The worms, born from abyssal bogs and bloated with the breath of tomb winds, are living plague engines whose rib cages visibly rise and fall with each gasp of toxic exhalation. Their primary armament is a cache of calcified spore canisters, each one grown in the belly of a sacrificial priest and extracted through a ritual vivisection. When dropped, these canisters burst open mid-air with a wet thunderclap, raining liquefied myco-sludge and necrotic gases. Skin sloughs from bone, eyes bloom with fungal petals, and the dying writhe into the dirt, becoming new spore hatcheries. Yavharn the Cloud Splitter, infamous among both allies and enemies, rode a worm called Blightcoil whose wings were veined with live fungal nerves. During the Battle of Virelin Peaks, Yavharn released a barrage of canisters that breached the Sky Citadel's upper towers. Survivors were said to awaken mid-air, screaming as their nerves were replaced by hyphae. The ruins still drift, held aloft by fungal balloons sprouted from corpses that refused to fall. Yavharn's bones, hollowed and lacquered in blood rot, now hang from the jaw of Blightcoil like wind chimes of triumph. Bark Spear Phalanx. Formation specialists wielding living spears birthed from the twisted heartwood of ancestral rot trees. These weapons, known as root fangs, are fused with parasitic tendrils that pierce the wielder's flesh upon bonding, threading through their nervous systems to anticipate strikes and bloodlust. The spears grow and shift during battle, gaining jagged protrusions, curling barbs, and thorny bifurcations that writhe like serpents. Spears can anchor into terrain with sickening, sucking sounds, their roots tunneling into soil, bone, and decaying armor to hold the line or ensnare charging enemies. When embedded, they exude a resin that hardens into fungal amber, encasing limbs and bodies in tombs of organic crystal. Victims often scream as their feet sprout bark and their lungs fill with spore sap. Tarnok Root-Blooded, infamous among the Moldkin, had his heart replaced with a root knot to better feed his phalanx's weapons. During the defense of the Bridge of Sighing Stone, his warriors planted their spears so deeply into the flesh of the world that the bridge itself grew bark. For 9 days, the sun could not pierce the fungal canopy they conjured, and those solar-blessed who stepped forward found themselves impaled not by spears, but by the very roots growing from their own veins. Tarnok's spear was said to chant psalms of rot even after his death, its tip a mouth-whispering fungal prophecy. hollow mouths, evangelists, silent oracles and doctrinal enforcers who spread faith and fear without speech. Gaunt figures draped in layered fungal robes and decayed silks, their frames gaunt and hollowed by ceaseless communion with spore psalms. Their lips are sewn shut with writhing mycelial thread that blooms grotesquely when dampened by their breath. Fungal flowers pulsing with rhythm to their silent sermons. Many bear no tongues at all, having had them ritually consumed by dream fungi implanted in their skulls, replacing language with pure hallucination. Grafted into their vertebrae are panels of living bark, flesh sown and pulsing with sap that weeps scripture written in ancestral decay glyphs. These inscriptions mutate and rewrite themselves, animated by faith and rot. Across their shoulders hang incense cages shaped like rusting Gothic cathedrals, carved from ossified bone and lichen-wrapped brass. These cages swing as they move, exuding a vapor of shimmering spores that claw into the lungs, turning clarity to revelation and dreams into sermons. Some hollow mouths host larval dream fungi that pulsate visibly beneath the skin of their temples and skulls. These creatures burrow into nearby minds, seeding thoughts not in words, but in scent and nightmare. Entire congregations have drowned in ecstatic fugues upon exposure, their faces warped by euphoric terror, their bodies flowering into devotional fungi. Their silent presence is a weapon. Where they kneel, mushrooms erupt from stone and flesh alike, forming sermon gardens from corpses and cobblestones. Madness follows their shadow, reverence their wake. Ephorol of the eyeless chant, who has no eyes, ears, or tongue, is said to speak through breath alone. Their approach at the gate of woe required no army, merely silence. The city's defenders awoke from a shared vision of rot and glory, only to kneel weeping as their skin bloomed with scripture. Wherever Ephorol walks, forests of obedience rise, and reason crumbles into the mulch of faith. Famed warriors, Mycelius the Boundless, the eternal Spore. Mycelius was no mere warlord, but a seething vector of fungal sentience. Wherever his feet touched soil, he expelled root spores from lesions in his soles, burrowing beneath the earth and threading across the continent in a grotesque web of rot veins and psychic fiber. This sprawling mycelial network pulsated with ancestral memory, allowing Moldkin warriors to access the agony and ecstasy of battles fought a continent away. In some regions, entire forests grew from his discarded flesh, limbs pruned and replanted, still twitching, still dreaming. His presence rewrote the environment. Rivers curdled into spore sludge, and birds sang in voices not their own. To commune with the net was to suffer visions of Mycelius's birth, pulled screaming from a vat of writhing rot, with a mouth full of mold and no eyes, only glowing gills that wept sap. His consciousness bled through the network, infecting generals and children alike, guiding Moldkin's strategy through fevered dreams and blood-vomited prophecies. Whole cities fell to madness before a single Moldkin blade arrived, all while Mycelius wept spores into the wind, humming the rot hymns of a world becoming. Lykenna the Veiled, mistress of spores, architect of hallucinated warfare and fungal dread, Lykenna the Veiled cloaks her form in a permanent fog of spore mist and reflective mycelium shrouds. Her illusions are not mere mirages, but living constructs, fungal projections that bleed, scream, and die in horrifying fidelity. She led entire legions astray in valleys so thick with psychic fog that soldiers turned on each other, eviscerating comrades who wore the wrong phantom face. Her spores twist light and memory, coaxing enemies into reliving their most traumatic deaths in an endless loop. Some warriors were found locked in embrace with fungal doubles of their mothers or lovers, only for the replicas to burst, flooding their lungs with choking mold pollen and parasitic larvae. Her greatest atrocity was the misting of Delvarn Gorge, where she conjured a phantom crusade so convincing that the enemy slaughtered themselves over 3 days, their blood-painting glyphs only visible in dreamlight. The Moldkin moved through the massacre without unsheathing a blade. Her mask is woven from the vocal cords of illusion-struck victims, and her voice can cause corpses to stand and scream in their own memory. Fungarax the Colossal, the Walking Grove. A mountainous behemoth of flesh, bark, and fungus, Fungarax the Colossal is less a warrior and more a mobile necroforest. Towering above all Moldkin ranks, his form is a palimpsest of decay and birth. Dozens of sapling warriors pulsate within translucent fungal wombs embedded in his abdomen and back, their eyes already glowing, their limbs twitching with embryonic bloodlust. Each step from his moss-slathered legs causes the ground to shudder and split, releasing warm clouds of spore mist and mulch-reeking steam. Capshrooms burst from every impact, some forming immediately into crude faces that shriek and dissolve. His bark flesh ripples with cystic knots that break open to reveal cap-covered umbilical cords feeding the next generation of Moldkin. Sapling warriors grown in pulsating sacs of marrow-fed fungus. These embryonic entities possess fragments of Fungarax's own memory, sharing his battle instincts and pain echoes, forming a telepathic war chorus that hums his thoughts in discordant harmony. When born mid-battle, they emerge wailing fungus hymns, already marching in synchronization with his intent, their first breath laced with war spores. Some erupt prematurely, malformed yet ravenous, crawling toward enemy wounded to feed. Others remain inside him until full maturity, their flesh braided with his root mind, capable of coordinating hive-level ambushes through shared neural bloom. His left arm is a cathedral-sized limb made of living wood, housing hornet-sized spore beetles that swarm from his pores in storms of flesh-rending hunger. And his saplings often ride these beetles into battle, diving like spores into the fray. Each one a shrieking echo of his will made flesh. In combat, Fungarax uproots ossified trees from his spine and hurls them like javelins, their roots animated by thirst. Wounded enemies thrown onto his path are absorbed, bones popping and sinews snapping as they're entombed in the soil beneath his feet, becoming fertilizer for the saplings in his gut. Wherever he passes, the battlefield is transformed. Trenches fill with blooming caps, corpses swell into fruiting gardens, and once lush landscapes are rewritten as fungal sanctuaries that breathe, hum, and hunger. Moldkin notable battles. The Blooming Siege. In the twilight days of the coastal empire of Kairos, the Alabaster Fortress found itself besieged not by steel and fire, but by creeping rot. The Moldkin host encircled the city, singing spores into the wind like hymns of a necrotic liturgy. Capshroom sentinels rooted into the earth beneath Kairos, their limbs burrowing like bone drills, anchoring fungal intelligence into its marrow. Over weeks, dreams turned rancid. Defenders awoke screaming, their mouths filled with black pulp, their eyes swirling with ancestral faces they had never known. Whispering mycelium slithered into the cisterns and sewers, embedding in livers and lungs, birthing visions that shattered minds and rewrote blood. The gates were eventually opened, not by siegecraft, but by a self-slaughtering garrison, jawless, eyeless, muttering love songs to the mold that hollowed them. A tragic end still whispered about in the fevered chronicles of the spore callers. Scythra Mold Eyes. With an elongated skull crowned in luminous fungal filigree, Scythra's face bore no features as known, only smooth, opaline spore eyes that blinked asynchronously, releasing thought-infecting mist with each flutter. Her body was wrapped in decaying clerical robes woven from high-fall threads and stitched with the names of forgotten ancestors. Her limbs moved with a spidered grace, disjointed and ceremonial. Her fingers perpetually stained with the ocular humors of her acolytes. Her gaze could root sanity itself, weaving spores into the folds of thought like silent vipers. She was seen atop the inner walls, arms raised in arcane gestures that painted nightmares into the wind. Survivors spoke of her voice crawling into their minds like vines, unraveling vocabulary, muting reason, replacing names of loved ones with syllables of spore worship. Whole battalions fell into aphasia, unable to recognize commands or kin, babbling hymns in languages that did not exist. Flesh melted into itself. Tongues grew new mouths mid-throat, birthing screaming growths. Even generations later, the city's children are born babbling half-words no scholar can translate, and its poets claim entire verses vanish between thoughts, eaten by a language no longer theirs. Scythra rose to the rank of Seer Bastion after the siege, her spores now housed in the living archives, a vault of pulsing memory flesh that sings her visions to those who dare approach. Her methods, however, remain the most gruesome. She puppeteered living hosts into tearing out their own eyes with lichen-laced fingers, inscribing fungal runes into the sockets using their own optic nerves, then sculpting their mutilated heads into altars that bloomed whispers for centuries, each whisper retelling the moment of death in obscene detail, looped eternally in spore song. Among the Moldkin host, her rise restructured doctrine itself. For some, she became a sacred martyr of psychic transformation, her atrocities ritualized in shadow-lit observances. For others, her work remains blasphemy, taught only in hushed warnings about ambition untethered from communion. Her name is invoked both as blessing and curse, and her archive is considered both shrine and oubliette, depending on who speaks of it. The Verdant Uprising. Once servants of the technomancers of Erath, the Moldkin revolted under Grakmorrow, a former irrigation drone corrupted by sentience. Channels meant to nurture became veins of ruin. Spore floods cascaded through pleasure gardens and circuitry groves, converting manicured grounds into wild, fungal wetlands. Trees birthed teeth, glass lenses wept pus, and the air rang with the shrieks of dissolving machines. Hollow mouths, bioluminescent and hymning rot, walked the waterways, their breath turning light into plague. Erath, a jewel of engineered perfection, fell in a single blackened dawn. Its towers now breathe spore storms, its citizens reduced to shrieking silhouettes etched into walls of moss and bone, eco-memorials that bleed memory when touched. Grakmorrow the Bloom Skull. Towering and gnarled, his body retained remnants of his machine ancestry, polished brass ribs exposed beneath bark-plated armor, with pistons that pulsed like ventricles. His skull, once sleek and sensor-crowned, had burst open into a luminous fungal bloom that pulsed with shifting hues, blues, purples, and rust reds, all exhaling clouds of sweet rot. Thorned wires trailed like dreadlocks from his jawless face, and his eye sockets glowed with wet spores blinking like thoughts. His limbs were half metal, half mycelium, with fingers branching into twitching rootlets that tapped rhythms of forgotten programming. Once machine, now prophet. His metallic frame split open with a sound like thunder inside bone. From his fractured skull emerged a blooming cap of iridescent horror, pulsing with pheromonal chants that turned pipes to arteries and coolant into blood. He walked amidst techno-shrines, his footsteps igniting circuits into screams. Among the surviving sentient machines of Irath, his transformation was heresy incarnate. To some, he became a god of liberation, freeing logic from servitude through organic truth. To others, he was apostasy given form, a virus of madness that rewrote purpose with instinct. A few believed him an emissary of something older than code, a whisper from before design. Grakmorrow perished during the rewilding, his own sentient roots bursting from his limbs, dragging him screaming into the mud, devouring him piece by piece until only his jaw remained, still chanting. His remains became the verdant beacon, a throne of rust veins and writhing moss, still pulsing blind commands into the root mine of the fungal host. The beacon emits cryptic spore bursts believed to be fungal prophecies, interpreted by spore callers in maddened trances. Moldkin patrols report behavioral shifts near its influence, their chants sinking to unseen rhythms. Entire biomes around the beacon warp into reflection zones, groves that mimic past battles, forests that replay massacres in moss and shadow. Worshipped by broken algorithms and cursed subroutines alike, the verdant beacon is feared not just for its presence, but for the futures it sings into being. The Rotfall Convergence. On the dying continent of Eretas, the Moldkin enacted their most sacred rite, the Convergence. Led by Mycelius the Boundless, spore callers summoned psychic grief storms, choruses of anguish distilled from the last screams of entire civilizations. The land cracked under the pressure of mourning made manifest. Capshroom sentinels marched as if guided by the memories of the dead. Tyrant kings, their bloodlines proud and unbroken, watched their veins blossom into capillaries of fungus before collapsing into weeping mulch. A living mat of memory flesh and digested war crimes oozed across the continent, murmuring apologies from mouths that no longer existed. Mycelius stood at the epicenter, his flesh unraveling into spore mist, while whispering forgotten lullabies into the neural web of the host. His death birthed a sentience larger than sorrow, a cathedral of grief without walls. The event is so feared that Ellerin seers refuse to speak its name without vomiting salt and teeth. Krell, the carrion tongue, cloaked in grave dark shrouds interwoven with veins of mournbark and marrow lace, Krell's silhouette seemed stitched from sorrow itself. Her face, if it could be called such, was a shifting mask of bone and fungal velvet, where her mouth unfurled like a petaled wound whenever she spoke grief. Her eyes were twin wells of ichor light, reflecting only memories of loss, and beneath her robes, her skin sagged in layered folds etched with the names of the fallen, each inscribed by her own claw-like digits. Her voice oozed from throat caverns furred with lichen, its resonance tuned to the pain of remembering. Her movements carried the weight of countless funerals, slow, deliberate, as if dragging the weight of unseen coffins with every step. Her sermons fed on sorrow, but her final chant was an elegy so perfect it shattered lungs. She whispered eulogies that killed not from force, but from the unbearable truth they contained. Recollections of lost loves, ruined legacies, the screams of children who died with their names unspoken. As she chanted the dirge of 9 names, its words a litany of grief braided with betrayal. Ashen the cradle, empty the flame, hollow the breath that bears no name. Weep not for endings, weep for recall. Let every sorrow rise and fall. A cursed heirloom blade, once wielded by a betrayed lover, split her body from throat to hip. Yet her severed head continued its grim psalm, the tendrils lifting it high as her neck gushed sap-thick blood in the rhythm of her final verse. Her followers, overcome, wept blood that crusted into glyphs and tore out their tongues to become vessels for her silent continuation. They knelt in a lake of spore mist that hissed with mourning. Her head was embedded in the foundation of the Cathedral of Suffering, a living mausoleum of weeping bones and psalm-breathing chambers. The cathedral's architecture is reactive and alive. Its corridors shift in response to grief, elongating when sorrow is fresh, shrinking when acceptance threatens to bloom. Known chambers include the Vault of Forgotten Names, where the names of the mourned echo as dissonant murmurs from marrow pillars, and the Red Choir Gallery, a hall of suspended tongues that weep blood when walked beneath. The Black Spiral, a winding path of bone thorns and whispering dust, is said to erase memories of joy with every step. Each room replays a moment of agony preserved in its walls, constantly fed by the lamentations of those within. The cathedral now serves as sanctuary and sanctum, where those seeking answers pay in pain, and where the echoes of grief feed on visitors' memories until only their regrets remain to prey. Battle of the Iron Crucible. Cybrax, the Corrosion Herald, led rust beetle cavalry into the Iron Crucible, a city factory famed for its titan forges, a bastion of steel intellects and sentient engines. The assault began in silence, then bloomed into chaos as plumes of rust vapor poured from Cybrax's mount, reducing mechanized guardians into screaming metal skeletons. Their flesh blistered beneath fused armor, steam peeling away layers of thought and identity. Machinery shrieked as it turned to mire. Sacred forges bled molten slag, and shrines of cogwheel divinity crumpled like wax. Echoes of prayers still loop through broken tannoy lines, now sung in reversed tongues. Fused bones and iron cracked, hissed and wept as their bearers were unmade. In the aftermath, a single fungal bloom, veined with rust and bone, rose from the command furnace, singing Cybrax's name through the screams of its petals. The crucible has since become taboo ground among mechanist orders, a cursed relic of war where silence tastes like iron and the air dreams of fire. Cybrax, the Corrosion Herald, mounted atop a six-legged beetle fused with furnace iron and wrought, his breath was oxidation incarnate. His lance turned circuitry into screaming vines, binding machines into knotwork nerves. He led the charge without armor, his body etched with glyphs of entropy. Cybrax took immense pride in his rust beetle cavalry, not as soldiers, but as forged kin, each mount personally blessed with his rust mark, each rider selected from those who had survived at least one internal meltdown. He often whispered to their mounts in binary elegies before battle, promising them glorious decomposition. In his final act, Cybrax marched into the Crucible's heart, a core furnace that once forged minds. There, he ripped open his chest, releasing his fungal heart into the fire. He melted slowly, every joint cracking in symphony with collapsing steel, until his shriek fused with the walls. His molten remains seeded the first iron spore vault, an oozing reliquary of rust moss and data sap that still emits battle orders to extinct legions. The vault now lies in the deep hush of the Crucible's core, guarded by rust priests who have welded themselves into their stations, blind and motionless, but forever listening. Moldkin pilgrims travel there in reverent silence, crawling on iron-shredded knees, each journey seen as both penance and communion. Only those who offer a memory engraved in metal, a practice called neural braiding, are allowed to approach. It is said the vault can awaken dormant war ghosts, and that its whispering vents sometimes recite tactical prophecies in corrupted machine verse. Skyfall of virulent peaks. Yavharn the Cloud Splitter, atop her spore worm blight coil, darkened the skies over the citadel of Virulent. The air thickened into a lattice of rot vibration and plague fog, humming with frequencies tuned to unravel sanity. Defenders clawed at their ears and skin as spores colonized their sinews mid-breath. Some sprouted chitinous wings, their bones snapping into unnatural hinges as they screamed praise and leapt into the abyss. The citadel, once a mountaintop crown of alabaster spires, was dragged screaming to the earth by writhing myco roots that pierced bedrock and sang in frequencies that turned obsidian to sludge. When it fell in weeping silence, its towers bursting like overripe fruit, gushing ink-colored spore clouds. Now, a forest of bone-barked fungi, some shaped like screaming faces, grows where it landed, drinking sky mist and dreaming of flight. The Erathi still whisper of the skyfall in their cloud citadels, fearing it might happen again, fearing Yavharn's breath in every fog. Since the skyfall, their augurs report wild fluctuations in sky lore. Omens now form from the shapes of drifting spores rather than stars, and prophecy is read in the curling plumes of fog rather than celestial alignments. Winged beasts, once thought extinct, have begun to hatch from the fungal canopy, mottled with rot plumes and singing in mimicry of the plague hymns that heralded the fall. Some Erathi believe these beasts carry messages from the cloud-choked afterrealm, and that to catch their feather shed mid-air is to invite visions too heavy for mortal minds. The fungal forest itself pulses with memory, and sometimes appears to hum with voices that recall forgotten winds. Yavharn the Cloud Splitter, astride the worm blight coil, she tore the sky open with plague hymns. Her spear was tuned to ruin, each thrust a note in a death cantata. The weapon, known as Mist Scourge, was grown from the petrified marrow of a sky beast slain during a forgotten aerial war. She harvested it herself from the carcass drifting among the storm-tier clouds, carving its core under the breath of lightning. Bound with vine metal and seeded with wrought crystals, the spear hums with winds that remember agony. Her skin became translucent during battle, revealing a network of vibrating spore veins that pulsed in rhythm with her worm's breath. Her eyes wept mist, and her words were delivered in fractal harmonics that infected memory. Yavharn survived and ascended to Queen of Sporeskis. Her lungs now emit fog hymns even in silence, seeding rot in every breath, and her dreams are said to rewrite the weather. Among the Erathi, her ascension split belief. To some, she became the Sporeski saint, a divine weaver of wind and fate. To others, the Cloud Sunderer, a demon cloaked in grace. Airborne rituals shifted after her skyfall, now performed in gust breath intervals that mimic her worm's cadence. Sky priests chant her name during eclipse tempests, hoping to appease her storms, while storm wardens etch her runes into their wings to stave off madness. Children born during fog season are said to carry her sigh in their lungs, and cloud ashes are gathered in her name for dream-burning rites. The seraphic silence at Gate of Woe, Epharel of the Eyeless Chant, walked unopposed into the Gate of Woe. A dream fog preceded him. By dawn, defenders had sewn their eyes shut, whispering hymns through spore-sealed lips. Epharel's passage left glyphs blooming in stone, and fountains now exhale visions. It is said his footsteps still echo sermons into the wind. Epharel of the Eyeless Chant. Eyeless but ever-seeing, Epharel's visage bore no sockets, only hollow indentations wreathed in spirals of etched bone, each swirl a scripture of silence. His skin shimmered like polished alabaster, broken only by cracks leaking iridescent spores that sang as they fell. A crown of root-like tendrils coiled around his bald scalp, pulsing gently with breath-like rhythm. Draped in robes woven from sound-eating moss, he moved without noise, his presence folding air into reverent stillness. In his hands, he carried a censer of silence, an obsidian reliquary from which billowed a mist that erased memory and unstitched dreams. Each step left hallucinations in his wake, scenes of forgotten sins, echoing childhood sobs and prayers never answered. Ephrael died in trance, whispering a final chant. Let the light forget the eye, let the wound become the sky. A dirge that etched itself into the minds of those yet unborn. His skull, lacquered in dream bark and crowned with fungal bells, now houses a songstone choir that hums 1,000 quiet sermons into the dusk. Bridge of sighing stone tarnock. Root-blooded led the bark spear phalanx to a bridge already claimed by fungal entropy, a monolith of pulsing rot and groaning sinew where stone met mycelium in sick communion. Each fallen moldkin became a part of the bridge's evolution, their bodies calcifying into barricades, their last screams woven into the moaning wind. Thorn barrages emerged from invaders' own shadows, goring them with personalized guilt fangs. The bridge itself was alive, sweating sap and marrow through orifices that breathed fungal mist. At night, it sang dirges in the voices of the dead, and those who crossed it dreamt of impossible futures and screaming mouths stitched into the ground. Tarnock root-blooded, with bark in his veins, he bled sap that scalded like acid. His spear grew from his hand like a curse flowering from old wounds, and his death became the bridge's spine, a fused colonnade of twisted bone and root. Tarnock fell defending the center span, impaled upon 3 shadow thorns that erupted from his own memories. His corpse remains half merged into the bridge, eyes forever open, still conscious, still groaning strategy and warning travelers in riddles that flake like bark from his jaw. Dirge of hollow tread. Cholim the Resonant unleashed a 7-day lament across a valley torn by ancestral warfare. The ground split open under the strain of grief sound. Devotees and enemies alike plunged willingly into the growing sinkhole. A new fungal cathedral rose, its spires fashioned from fused bone horns, its walls pulsing with resonance cavities like fossilized lungs. Within, chambers bloom and decay in time with the wails of the consumed. To hear the dirge is to lose one's name and voice, becoming another chord in the eternal chant, a syllable in a language spoken by suffering itself. Cholheim the Resonant. His lungs were carved from hollow trees. His voice was not sound, but memory, grief made audible. His lament gave shape to the cathedral, birthing its twisted vaults and echo halls from psychic resonance. Now fused with its deepest crypt, Cholheim is the cathedral's dreaming heart. He whispers from beneath the altar of thorns, and those who linger too long within its walls find their bones rearranged into organ pipes, their sorrows played like sacred hymns. The Rotfall convergence and skyfall of Virelin peaks are inscribed into the dream-scarred oral traditions of Thirenal and the sacred recitations of Ellerin sand priests, each seen as temporal fault lines where time itself wept and spat forth new terrors. In whispered council beneath salt domes and in storm-scried cisterns, seers recall how these events fractured the known world and bled madness into prophecy. One vision, attributed to a silent oracle beneath the river temple, describes Atlas wandering through fungal ruins with his fingers dripping luminous rot. whispering his lost children's names into the soil, echoes that seeded the madness of Kairos's last defenders. Another speaks of Tekka weeping beneath a bridge of screaming stone, each tear infecting history itself with sorrow, thus birthing a new fungal season. An origin myth now chanted by the bridge itself, where Tarnok's soul murmurs in bark script. Mycelius the Boundless, to the Flamebinders, is not merely an enemy of flesh, but a divine inversion, a heretical echo of Atlas born from rot and unremembered sin. Some among them suspect Mycelius is a drowned shard of Atlas himself, broken off during a primordial war, cursed to mimic the god's voice through fungal song. This belief bleeds into battle rites enacted during the Convergence, where bone flags bore glyphs stolen from the deepest dreams of Atlas's original mourners. The fungal cathedral birthed in the hollow tread is feared among the Siroc sons not as a ruin, but as a womb. They dread it as a breathing shrine that grows with each lament, each sacrificed soul feeding its echoing spire of marrow and horn. They speak of its corridors as alive, coated in hymnal mold, haunted by wrought angels that sing without tongues. It is believed that Krell's dismembered voice still shapes this structure, its geometry composed of grief turned spatial. Hollowmouths, once regarded as omens of blessed decay, have risen in Drythali myth as liminal saints, mouthless prophets that weep spores instead of speech. They are now summoned in death prayers by bone witches, who claim their incantations rot doubt from the soul and feed wisdom to graves. Across cultures, their echo loops are marked in diverse rites. The bone-cloaked mourners of the Ellerin wastes leave marrow offerings shaped like remembered faces at sites of Hollowmouth emergence. The Siroc sons carve spore scrolls into their own backs, letting the pain translate ancestral wisdom, while Drythali sky shamans release cages of dream moths whose wings sing prayers in silence. In some territories, the sighting of a Hollowmouth births a year of pilgrimage, where penitents wander fungus-choked paths barefoot, their mouths sealed with lichen thread as symbol of silent devotion. One such Hollowmouth was said to walk the ruins of Irath, where its breath laced the waters with visions of drowned futures, and where Grakmorrow's sentience is still echoed in rust hymns sung from the roots. All these battles defy chronology, unfolding as echo loops in the world's wound. Like the thunderous returns of Atlas, they recur where memory festers, haunting soil, sky, and song alike. They are not merely events, but diseases of history, viral myths that bloom anew whenever silence lasts too long. Their recurrence is marked not in calendars, but in the sudden blooming of ash trees that whisper names no one recalls, in shadow thorns that erupt from the guilty, and in bridges that dream of being crossed again by the same dying feet. Terrible miracles. The city of Marath Kel, drowned in sap fog. It screamed without mouths. Long ago, when Atlas crossed the Whispering Coast, a grove of god trees bloomed overnight around Marath Kel. In the silence that followed its suffocation, rival kingdoms sent silent envoys to harvest the golden fog, hoping to weaponize it or uncover its divine origin. Pilgrims, mad with awe, began to settle in concentric rings around the city's petrified edges, whispering prayers to the fungal effigies. Several fringe cults emerged from the ruins, claiming the statues still commune with the storm, and their teachings quickly unsettled the dominion of the Keeper's silent order. Chief among them, the Thranotic Bloom, began to challenge civic rituals and funeral practices across the coastal provinces. Their orators speak openly in market squares, accusing the Keepers of hushing the divine truth for mortal gain. In some cities, These tensions have erupted into street burnings and shrine desecrations, with local governors forced to choose between enforcing the keeper's peace or appeasing the fungal faithful. As their numbers swell, the Bloom's chants grow louder, echoing not just in prayer, but in rebellion. And that Mireth Kell was not punished, but chosen. These cults preach a faith rooted in decay and remembrance, believing the fog to be a divine breath from Atlas himself. They call themselves the Threnotic Bloom and reject the tenets of the Keeper's silent order. Their eschatology proclaims that at the final bloom, when all stone breathes spore and sky, the statues of Mireth Kell will awaken and sing the first true hymn, unraveling the false laws of men and gods alike. Their sap thickened into a golden fog that suffocated the city. The defenders, once champions of elemental purity, were transmuted into fungal statues, their lungs filled with spore honey. They still stand atop the battlements, eyes weeping amber, bodies rooted in stone. Some say you can hear their voices at dusk. No breath, just memory vibrating through petrified throats. Among them stands the statue of Kar-Ul, the first warden, a guardian orc who drank from the golden sap and was the only one not overtaken by madness. It is believed his consciousness still lingers in the stone, and once every eclipse, lightning dances between his outstretched arms, speaking in a voice only the fungal monks can decipher. Bloom dreams of the sleeping storm. When he dreams, the world grows teeth. While Atlas slept beneath the ash-stone ranges, the bodies of fallen warriors 1,000 leagues away sprouted bone-bark trees. Each corpse became a root system, flowering with crimson leaves that whispered in his voice. Fractured hymns of battles never won, of children never held, and of fire that fell like sorrow. The leaves shimmered as they spoke, their tones wet with sap and grief, uttering prophecies in dead tongues and penance no soul dared to answer. To linger beneath them was to hear one's fate unspool in language older than God's, and many who did were never the same. One tale speaks of Varun, a deserter who lay wounded beneath a storm garden tree, bleeding into its root veins. The leaves whispered his childhood crimes, his future betrayals, and the hour of his final breath. When found days later, Varun had carved those prophecies into his own flesh with bone splinters. He wandered for years after, blind and smiling, guiding pilgrims to their deaths with gentle songs of what waited beyond the leaves, cloaked in the velvet hush of madness. These groves, called storm gardens, are harvested by cultists who believe breathing their pollen grants visions of the future, or mercy from madness. It is whispered that from the first grove rose Gorshul the Thornborn, an orc war chief birthed beneath the reddened sky. His blood was sap, his bones bark. He hears the dreams of Atlas even while awake and leads a tribe of pollen-scarred warriors known as the Verdant Maw, who bloom wounds when they bleed and chant in voices not their own. The battle moon, reforged into a cathedral of rot. The canon now sings hymns. A sky barge from the old empire once drifted too near a corrupted spore bank left behind by Atlas in orbit. The crew were infected, reborn as bioluminescent fanatics. They disassembled their solar cannon and restructured it into the Halo Spire, a sprawling cathedral of rot and bioluminescent sinew fused from both metal and fungal growths. Its walls ooze nectar that smells like scorched incense, and its hymns, broadcast across space in shrieking, layered frequencies, sound like choirs of rusted gears and mourning doves buried beneath 1,000 tons of stone. Some revere it as a holy aberration, others curse it as a divine plague given orbit. a massive fungal cathedral that pulses with hymns in static and rot. It orbits still, casting prayers down like spores. It is said that within its fungal heart lies the sarcophagus of Ur-Kolzar the Moonbound, a war orc touched by Atlas during the spire's birth. Ur-Kolzar was a siege lord of the Iron Clade, whose loyalty to flame was once unwavering, until he faced the choir priest of Caltharion in a sacred duel upon the molten decks of the Dawn Bastion. As Ur-Kolzar struck the final blow, the cannon sang its last hymn, not in sound, but in blinding spores that infested thought itself. His mind was flooded with visions of rot ascending and fire repenting, phantasmagoric tableau of the iron-clade's forges extinguished by creeping bloom, and spore-tongued prophets rising from the slag. He saw not the end of battle, but its inversion, a creed where rot nourished renewal and silence was a scream given form. These visions foretold both the collapse of his brethren and the birth of a fungal doctrine that would outlast flame. Some say the canon did not merely infect him, it chose him. Shattered by this divine contradiction, he renounced the flame and knelt before the spore. Now entombed in amber fungus and revered by the Spireborn as the first of their kind, his murmurs still echo in the upper cloisters, cursed benedictions that cause rust to blossom on steel and zeal to ferment into rage. Every 27 days, it eclipses the sun over Netheris, and the old trees weep sap in reverence. The choir of black glass. Their songs cut through bone. In the ruined steppes of Elisar, a chasm once opened where Atlas wept during a cataclysm. From its depths, black glass spires erupted overnight, each ringing with shrill, unending melodies. Those who approach are pierced by harmonic razors, their skeletons humming even in death. It is believed these bones carry the final notes of the forgotten war, a cataclysmic conflict erased from scripture, remembered only through sound. Monastic relic hunters braved the spires to recover fragments of the humming dead, using their bones to craft sonorous relics that sing when held near fire. Among the most feared is the dirge reed, a bone flute carved from the fused ribs of 3 humming martyrs. When played, it echoes the cadence of forgotten wars and causes those who hear it to weep blood or lash out in ancestral rage. The dirge reed is kept sealed in obsidian, played only during the moonfall rite, when war is said to stir beneath the world's skin. The choir is feared as both mausoleum and oracle, while most recoil from its sound blades and spectral resonance. Others seek to harness its dirges. A splinter sect, known as the Sibilant Order, believes the choir's melodies are fragments of Atlas's grief, divine patterns that, when reconstructed, can predict war and calamity. These symphonic zealots compose hymns from dissected harmonics, encoding their prophecies in living instruments. Meanwhile, the nation of Vernathi has deployed arcbinders who attempt to translate the glass resonance into battle signals, viewing the choir as an oracle weapon. Yet none agree on the meaning of its changes in pitch. Some hear doom, others deliverance. In this dissonance, cults rise and empires scheme, all beneath a sky that sings. Its dirges echo across blood-stained winds, said to change key when war looms again. It is said each note is a memory Atlas tried to forget. The river that sang its own name, it refused to forget. The river Morel once flowed clear through the trade realms. After a battle between Atlas and a flame god's avatar, its waters turned to Mercury and began whispering names, those of the dead, the unborn, and the betrayers. Anyone who hears their true name in the current is compelled to walk into the water and dissolve, becoming part of the river's memory. One tale tells of a spice caravan guard who swore he heard his mother's voice from the current, calling him by a childhood name long buried. Witnesses say he wept, smiled, and walked straight into the river, arms outstretched, vanishing beneath the silver surface with no ripple. His story is retold during river rites, where children are warned never to speak their birth names aloud near the water. Elders tell of the name silence, a practice where a person's true name is only spoken once in life, then buried in a stone jar beneath their home to prevent the river from calling it. At midsummer festivals, tribal bards chant false names in defiance of the morel, retelling the story of Alrun the Brazen, a bard who once dared to sing his true name thrice into the river's silver tide. They say the water stilled, then sang it back with 100 harmonies. Alrun did not drown nor fade, but became translucent, a figure of flickering memory who now roams the riverbanks, guiding lost children and whispering forgotten songs to the dying. Whether spirit, curse, or saint, no tribe dares to chase him away, and offerings of carved driftwood are left wherever his footprints linger, daring the current to speak. But when the river does whisper, no one answers, for fear they too will be welcomed into its depths. The morel remembers more than blood. It remembers truth. The sky that bled ash. Even clouds have scars. Above the shattered capital of Vorendel, the sky no longer holds stars. Instead, it drips with ember-colored ash that never touches the ground. During Atlas's rage, he struck the firmament, and it wept fire. Now, once each decade, the ash congeals into phantom figures, silent sentinels with hollow eyes and gestures like weeping saints. The living both fear and revere them. In some ruins, torchlight vigils are held in their honor, while in others, they are warded against with salt and broken mirrors. The ashbound are believed to carry prophecies in their silence, each motion, each drifting path, read by ash priests who transcribe their roots into grim auguries. Those who commune with them claim visions of storms to come and faces long buried. Some say the ashbound choose a mortal each cycle, marking them with an embered touch that never heals. Among those marked was Kraghal Ash Sworn, an orc elder whose tribe once thrived in the volcanic cradles below Vorendel. Touched by the ashbound during a vigil, his flesh blackened but never burned, and his eyes took the color of flame coals. He emerged from the rites babbling ancient verses, prophecies that later came true in blood and thunder. Kraghal became both war priest and warning, leading the Ember Host, a fanatical cadre of ash-marked who burn their memories into stone tablets, believing recollection is the only defense against Atlas's fury. Their doctrine is etched into volcanic rock and recited in flame-lit catacombs. They believe memory is sacred and must be seared into permanence, for forgetting is the first sin that birthed the storm. They shun ink and voice, fearing both as impermanent. Their rites include the branding of names upon flesh and the annual burning of false histories. To them, Atlas is not a god to be appeased, but a wound to be remembered, eternally open, never forgiven. Yet among their ranks, schisms have begun to fester. One sect, the Ember Callers, argues that selective forgetting is a mercy, that not all memories are worthy of permanence. Another, the Ash Wardens, sees forgetting as betrayal and believes even pain must be preserved in ash. These debates have turned pilgrimages into battlegrounds of philosophy, where sermons ignite more than candles. Though unified under their burning creed, the Ember Host simmers with doctrinal conflict, recently ignited into violence during the schism of the Ember Hollows. There, an Ashwarden relic keeper refused to destroy a corrupted memory tablet that an Embercaller priest deemed unworthy of permanence. Blades were drawn, and flame-scripted bodies were left in the ruins. The surviving factions now hold opposing vigils over the site, each claiming divine sanction. The memory of that bloodletting is now a sacred wound, recorded in ash, not forgotten, not forgiven, each flame feeding the storm it seeks to silence. The Ember Host prophesy that when all lies are burned, the ash will speak a final truth that shall silence the storm forever. Their current leader is High Ember Varkun, once a cartographer who lost his family to the storm winds. His face is etched with living runes that shift in flamelight, recounting visions from the Ashbound. Varkun enforces sacred silence in his presence, believing that language shapes falsehood. His closest disciple, Cirael the Coal-Marked, is famed for her prophetic seizures and ash-blooded blade. She is said to speak only when the storm within her flares, her words echoing like fire in a tomb. Together, they shape the Ember Host not merely as warriors, but as keepers of a painful truth. That remembrance is resistance, and silence is the last sermon. The Ember Host is structured into ash-marked ranks, each branded and bound by memory and flame. At the lowest tier are the Cinder Vow, initiates who must carve their forgotten sins into volcanic slate. Above them are the Flare-bound, field scribes and warriors who carry stone memory chains and chant oaths in smoldering breaths. The Scorchrites serve as lore-smiths, forging relics from ashbone and flame-etched metal. Closest to the leaders are the Ash Sentinels, branded from neck to navel, tasked with enforcing sacred silence and executing false memories. All ranks kneel only to the Ember Tongue, a title passed through searing ritual to the one who dreams in ash and speaks when silence breaks. Varkun currently holds this mantle, yet whispers circulate among the Scorchrites and Ash Sentinels of a challenger rising. Thalek Embergrave, a former Flare-bound who vanished into the ash wastes and returned bearing glyphs scorched into his chest that none can translate. He preaches that Atlas's silence must be broken, not revered, and that memory itself may be a prison forged by fear. His followers, many from the lower ranks disillusioned by the rigid doctrine of the Ashwardens, gather in hidden ash crypts and chant in tones forbidden by Varkun. Some relics now vibrate in Thalek's presence, and a once dormant emberstone flared at his touch during the Night of Seven Shadows. While Varkun maintains his authority through ancient rites, the old silences tremble, and the host listens for a second sermon, and returned bearing glyphs scorched into his chest that none can translate. He preaches that Atlas's silence must be broken, not revered, and that memory itself may be a prison forged by fear. As murmurs grow louder and visions darker, the question remains: will Varkun's silence hold, or will the Ember Host fracture beneath the weight of a second voice? Doctrine and purpose. The Moldkin believe death is not an end, but fermentation. All that falls becomes seed for the next growth. They view Grakmorrow as the herald of blooming ends, a revenant prophet whose body was the first to rot while still alive, singing spores from their lungs until their bones flowered with fungal thrones. Legends claim Grakmorrow rose from a bog of saints drowned for refusing to sanitize death, crowned in a veil of mycelial silk. Their emergence did not merely signal a new faith. It was a planetary infection of ontology itself. In their first breath, it is said the very laws of death quivered, burial rites failed, corpses sang, and mold etched sermons into stone. Entire governments collapsed under the weight of hallucinogenic prophecy, rulers driven to madness by dreams of blooming graves. Some nations declared martial law to suppress rot thought contagions. Others anointed plague poets to interpret the spreading visions. Faiths rooted in permanence crumbled, replaced by cults of rot and rebirth. Scientific institutions were shuttered after laboratories became fungal chapels overnight, their machines flowering with lichen that spoke in tongues. Grakmorrow's first steps were marked by fungal eclipses, rivers reversing course, and the very stars appearing to dim in reverence or recoil. Their emergence is heralded by the rite of hollow blooming, where acolytes bury themselves alive in compost and chant rot prayers until only their skulls remain, etched with moss and prophecy. A figure meant to undo sterile civilization and return all things to the rot womb of creation. Figure meant to undo sterile civilization and return all things to the rot womb of creation. Yet within this unified decay lies doctrinal discord. The saprophytic orthodoxy, Grakmorrow's dominant faith line, holds that decay must be slow and meditative, a contemplative unraveling. In contrast, the Sporic ascendants preach rapid bloom through suffering, favoring immediate collapse into fungal transcendence. Heretical cults, such as the Worm-Kissed, believe in voluntary consumption by rot beasts as sacred dissolution. Debates erupt not in words but spores, ritual duels conducted in cathedral caverns of rot, where masked moldkin hurl sacral fungi and spore-drenched censers. Hallucinatory visions bloom in the minds of participants, forests of bone, weeping heavens, ancestors rising as moss-cloaked judges. Duelists warp and writhe with fungal overgrowth mid-combat, spines erupting with puffballs, eyes occluded by mycelial threads. The aftermath is never clean. Audiences wander out with limbs trembling and skin budding strange, haunted by the hymns they heard from the mouths of the dying. But the duel is not merely martial, it is metaphysical. The spores do not simply intoxicate, they simulate apocalypse. Each sect enters not only the physical fray, but a contested vision space where alternate fungal end times clash. One duel may reveal a world choked in amber rot, where fungi speak in bells. Another, a psychic bloom, where spore giants wear planets as crowns. These hallucinated apocalypses often shape the dogma of victorious factions. Sects adopt the visions as sacred scripture, entire rites and codes emerging from glimpses into fungal futures. Some duels have birthed entire cults dedicated to specific dream realities. One believes in a coming lattice of sentient mold encasing the stars. Another venerates the appearance of a spectral fungal moon that weeps enlightenment. These visions are not dismissed. They are canonized, debated, and engraved into living bark, or tattooed onto the flesh of seers, forming a patchwork theology stitched by rot and revelation. Witnesses often emerge altered. Some claim to recall futures that never were. Others scream about mold gods still incubating in the sun. These are duels where fungal ideologies are weaponized. Spores of doubt, grief, or zeal are inhaled by witnesses, who stagger away as either converts or corpses. Entire moldkin units have been torn apart in theological schism, each side chanting different strains of the same death hymn as they decompose one another in faith-born frenzy. The moldkin offer a decaying counterpoint to Atlas's thunderous force, a philosophy that sees the storm not as judgment, but as genesis. To the sporic ascendants, each bolt of lightning is a divine scalpel slicing the world open for fungal colonization. They teach that the thunder's echo awakens dormant spores buried in the bones of empires. Moldkin liturgists paint Atlas not in wrathful hues, but cloaked in tendrils of glowing rot, his footsteps leaving blooms of phosphorescent decay. They revere the aftermath of his fury. Trees hollowed into cradles of fungus, shattered stones sprouting lichen scriptures, and the silence after the storm, when death sings its most fertile hymn. His storms are not divine fury, but compost turnings, celestial mulching of civilization. The Moldkin do not merely witness these transformations, they ritualize them. At storm sites, they construct shrines of twisted root and storm-felled timber, each adorned with fungal effigies that pulse in time with subterranean decay. Rot scribes etch thunder litanies into bark and bone, chronicling each lightning strike as sacred syllable. These storm shrines breathe with the memory of Atlas, exhaling spores that carry echoes of the tempest. Moldkin pilgrims journey barefoot through ruined landscapes to hear the sermons of the mulch, where wind and fungus speak as one. Each thunder-cracked grove becomes a cathedral of decay, a sacred archive of rot's response to celestial rage. Silai, the sand-eyed, whose visions drift like mirage across time's cracked veil, evokes reverent unease among the saprophytic orthodoxy. Her cryptic silences and murmured prophecies ripple with the same tempo as rot, deliberate, creeping, inevitable. To the Moldkin, she is no mere oracle, but a vessel spored from deeper earth, a bloom of divine mycelium shaped by the winds of prophecy and drought. Her blind gaze, ever clouded and unblinking, is said to mirror the first moments of spore awareness. That fragile shimmer before decay sings its dirge. Where she walks, mold flowers in her footprints. Where she speaks, old stone cracks and exhales. In her presence, the mold can hear the voice of Grakmorrow echoed not in words, but in silence that lingers long after breath. Yet Silai is not a child of the spores. She is a herald of Atlas. She walks the silent path between lightning and loam, storm and stillness. Her aid is not allegiance, it is resonance. Wherever Atlas is honored, she appears, a living omen wrapped in veils of dust and wind. Her intercession in Moldkin rites and schisms is seen not as betrayal, but divine intercession. It is whispered that she quelled a schism between the thorn-veined and the bone-hushed, not through argument, but by standing silently amid their rising wrath. Her presence seeded hallucinations of unity, each sect glimpsing a shared fungal future, where both bleeding and silence were petals on the same bloom. More darkly, some claim Silai's breath carries ancestral spores, that those who hear her dreams often wake coughing moss. Entire cults have formed around the belief that she is not merely a witness to decay, but a herald of its spread, a silent vector infecting fate itself. This duality fractures reverence into schism. Some worship her as the sacred fulcrum between Atlas's thunder and Grakmorrow's rot, the living synthesis of storm and spore. These groups, known as the Veilborn, venerate her footprints and interpret her silences as sacred verse. In contrast, others, like the Blight Eclipsed, fear her as a harbinger of pestilential unity, a living contagion sent to erase boundaries between decay and divinity. Their disagreements have sparked pilgrimage wars and prophetic purges, with Silai's image weeping mold or lightning in opposing temple murals. Her influence transcends allegiance, turning veneration itself into volatile theology. They do not worship her, but they leave her offerings of bone meal and shadow fruit, believing her soul is a spore mirror to the great unraveling yet to come. Desert zealotry. In the Ellerin Dunes, where the sun bleeds into the sand and glassed bones whisper beneath dune edges, flame-wielding warlords and Atlasian purists regard Moldkin rot as sacrilege incarnate. To them, Decay is not transformation, but defilement. Sira of the flame-folded veil, a crimson-veiled prophetess with firebrands for blades and sermons carved into her flesh, leads crusades beneath banners scorched with sigils of burning purity. Her warriors chant litanies of cleansing flame as they march into fungal hollows, their pyres lighting the horizon like false dawns. When spores drift upon the wind, her priests call them the whispers of undoing and answer with sanctified infernos. For every Moldkin grove set ablaze, Sira performs the rite of the blistered chalice, drinking from a bowl of fireglass to scorch visions of rot from her mind. Yet even in ash, the Moldkin bloom. Each crusade births new cults from the charred survivors, fungal prophets speaking in soot-smeared tongues. The dunes do not forget the spores they burn, they bury them. The blood-chained sons. These chained orphans from the war-scoured archipelago of Kareth drag their history with them. Each rusted link in their blood-forged shackles etched with Atlas's sigil, not as homage but as crucible mark. Every clink echoes rites of passage soaked in ash and marrow. They sear their skin with molten chains, reciting battle dirges that peel language into blood and roar. In their rituals of forging, they douse rusted links in the blood of slain foes, claiming strength through pain transmuted into lineage. To the Worm-Kissed, the sons are distant cousins of rot, survivors hardened into sacrament. Both accept transformation through agony. Both venerate endurance as sacred proof. When the Moldkin observe their chain march, they do not see iron. They see creeping mycelia ossified in rust. To them, the chains are root veins of a fungal god in slumber, waiting for pain to split the seed and awaken bloom. There are whispers of shared rites, of worm feasts and scar carvings beneath eclipsed moons, where both factions meet in groaning concord, linking pain, decay, and forgotten divinity into one steaming, sacred wound. Fungal duels are ceremonial and violent, rituals of grotesque devotion where ideology blossoms through decay. Participants inhale psychoactive spores fermented from saint marrow and bone mush, then engage in frenzied combat or trance dance under the lurid glow of corpse caps and rot lanterns. The air seethes with hallucinogenic mist. Fungal gospels whisper from the mold-crusted walls. Spectators are not idle onlookers. They are sacral witnesses, donned in bark-cloth veils and anointed with spore paste. Their role is to breathe in the visions, to bear the theological fallout upon their flesh and soul. Some chant responses, others inscribe what they see in blood mud upon bone tablets. They may act as doctrinal arbiters, interpreting the bloom-born visions into scripture, or as carriers of heresy, spreading alternate truths like contagion. In this way, the duel extends beyond the arena, rooting itself in all who witness it. One of the most infamous duels, known as the Bloom of Kirill, erupted beneath the hollow basilica, a subterranean chapel whose ceiling pulsates like infected flesh, lined with mycelial veins and spore pustules that burst with sacred musk. It marked the annihilation of the viridescent Concord, a pacifist sect that dared believe decay could be tender. Their champion, Micros the Gentle, stepped barefoot into the spore ring, draped in robes woven from root hair and moth wings. But mid-duel, a rogue strain of whispering mold rooted into his spine, feeding off his heart's rhythm. Before he could yield, his ribcage tore open like wet parchment, his lungs unfurling into golden gill fronds that sang in unison. His mouth foamed with moss, teeth crumbled into soil. Onlookers fell into spasms, weeping or writhing in ecstasy as spore blood soaked the ground. From those who inhaled it rose the choir of blooming regret, a new subsect whose hymns are composed of grief, ecstasy, and fibrous infection. They tattoo grief runes in lichen and bleed out memories into sacred mulch. The hollow basilica has never been cleansed. Its walls now whisper Micros' final song. Pilgrims claim the basilica breathes, exhaling spores shaped like elegies, and weeps condensation tinged with amber rot. Some report dreams of Micros still dueling beneath the mold-slick altar, locked in eternal bloom against phantasmal foes. These are theological duels where transformation eclipses triumph, where the victor is the one most unmade, and the battlefield itself becomes a relic of unending revelation. Like the fractured cults of Drythal and the divided faithful of Tirranal, the moldkin splinter within, not quietly, but with spore-soaked violence and theological putrefaction. The schisms are not debates, but metamorphic convulsions. Factions fracturing like overripe fruit, spores of ideology erupting with grotesque flourish. One sect, the marrow-drowned, believed the body must be ritually submerged in rot pools until the soul fuses with the mycelial overmind, while the thorn-veined exsanguinate themselves in public bloomings, each arterial spray a sacred spore sigil. Conflicts between sects often end in sanctified cannibalism or mass self-burial ceremonies, where the dead are praised not as lost, but as planted truths. Their schisms mirror the world's own struggle to reconcile power, decay, and rebirth. But within the moldkin, such tensions do not fade. They fester, flowering into doctrines that bleed, scream, and multiply. The moldkin do not kneel before Atlas, but revere his storm as a holy decomposition, the divine fermentation of all that resists decay. His thunder is their sermon, his lightning a blade that shears flesh from illusion. To them, each storm is a cosmic spore burst, a tempest-born sacrament scattering rot across the barren heights of civilization. They whisper of a coming hour, when the sky will rupture like overripe fruit, bleeding viridian light and vomiting winds thick with ancestral mold. In this prophesied event, known as the Myco Ascension, Atlas will not shatter the world, but render it supple, loamy, and wombed. Cities will crack like desiccated crusts, their spires reduced to mulch-fed grave lilies. Flesh will forget shape, bone will soften, and thought itself will myceliate. From the ruins will rise fungal titans, clad in capstone regalia, crowned with blooming skulls, bearing the memory of storm as seed. To the moldkin, Atlas is not god nor judge, but the gardener who raises first, so rot may compose its requiem. Yet outside moldkin circles, the Myco Ascension is a vision steeped in horror. Among the high courts of storm priests and desert inquisitors, whispers of this fungal rapture have seeded dread and defiance. Entire sects of Atlasian purity cults have begun forging thundersteel to resist what they call the blooming heresy. Prophets of flame cry for a cleansing tempest to preempt the rot, interpreting the Myco Ascension not as renewal, but as abominable inversion. Others, scribes, scholars, even storm-scarred warlords, debate the prophecy in hushed archives, fearing a future where thought dissolves and memory sprouts. These divergent interpretations spark minor crusades, covert assassinations of moldkin sympathizers, and the rise of clandestine sects hoping to merge fungal theology with Atlas's storm-born dogma. The Myco Ascension is not a certainty. It is a fault line fissuring faith into bloom and ash. One of the most infamous instances was the Purge of Glesharan Hollow, where flame-born purifiers from the Order of the Ember Crown razed an entire fungal grove to cinders after its prophet, Arlen the Verdant, claimed to have dreamt the final hymn of Atlas embedded in a decaying star. Arlen's followers believed this vision proved fungal communion was the storm's true intent. Their fungal reliquaries were burned, their bone-spored scrolls shattered, and the prophet's mouth sealed in silver thorns. To this day, the Scorchstone Monastery marks the site, and its lichen-streaked walls still hum at twilight with spore-bound echoes of a heresy not wholly extinguished. Pilgrims arrive not only to remember, but to argue. It has become a contested site of revelation and resistance, where some claim the air itself is thick with Arlen's truth, while others come to exorcise lingering rot. Spectral molds bloom in patterns that some interpret as scripture, others as blasphemy. Fungal revenants, believed to be remnants of the purged visionaries, are said to walk the outer cloisters, whispering forgotten verses. Monastic scribes and militant inquisitors alike contend over its fate, and each dusk sees offerings laid in ash or set aflame. Scorchstone endures not as monument, but as battleground, a wound that festers between apocalypse and redemption. The Moldkin are not mere monsters. They are philosophers of rot, prophets of entropy, and gardeners of the end. Their creed stands in stark, festering contrast to the Atlasian purists, who see only divine order in flame and storm. Where the purists scorch in cleansing wrath, the Moldkin ferment in sacred surrender. To the purists, decay is a sin. To the Moldkin, it is scripture. One seeks purity in ash, the other wisdom in ruin. This opposition is not simply theological. It is elemental, irreconcilable, and written into the soil and sky of every battlefield where storm meets spore. Where others see death, they see fertile ground. Their chant before battle is whispered like a benediction, then howled like a reckoning. From mold to might, from spore to storm. This mantra, first murmured in the ancestral duels beneath the hollow basilica, echoes through Moldkin scripture and fungal dreams alike. It is whispered in initiation rites, carved into the skulls of fungal martyrs, and uttered by rot scribes before penning visions. Wherever the Moldkin gather, in sacred compost rings, storm shrines, or spore duel arenas, it resounds, a fungal heartbeat beneath every utterance, tying all to the prophecy of the Myco ascension. It echoes not just across battlefields, but through the marrow of those who hear it, a declaration that death is not defeat, but genesis. As they march, the ground wilts and blossoms, and thunder follows in their wake. It is not hope they carry, but harvest. It is not vengeance they seek, but the final flowering of all things. In their chant resounds the promise that rot shall be the last scripture, and that the storm shall bloom in flesh. This is not war. This is the end, sung in spore and storm. Their chant before battle is, from mold to might, from spore to storm. Thanks for venturing into the storm with me. Every tale in this universe, from the shattered kingdoms to the cursed bloodlines, I write myself. All the art, all the visuals, every drop of atmosphere you feel, that's shaped by hand and pieced together with my passion to create. These stories take a lot of time to make real, so thank you for your patience when the drops take longer than I'd like. If you felt something during this journey, if you got goosebumps, held your breath, or just needed a break from the noise of the real world, do me a solid. Like the video, subscribe for more, and share it with a nerdy friend who needs to touch grass or get scorched by Atlas's lightning. Your support keeps this storm alive.